Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto merged with Fem Kyuubi. Part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start, please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends. And check out the description. And check out my playlist. So let's start the video. Genesis of the Kitsune Yaokai. He remembered the burning in his stomach and the cries he had screamed in the night he had been born. It was both a blessing and a curse as the seal was still on his stomach. He had been granted the genin rank after succeeding in protecting the scroll of seals and immediately celebrated with Iruka. He had been shocked when he was told that the great Kyuubi no Kitsune was sealed within his stomach. Anyone would be afraid to learn that a gigantic Kitsune was inside you, but he was just a kid who had gone through so much that it didn't matter. He only aspired the Hokage title for anything resembling recognition from the villagers, but soon he knew that it was futile with the Kyuubi still sealed within his stomach. It didn't matter to him. He would get something out of the villagers even if it were terror and fear. It didn't matter if he had to beg the fox to give him the power. He looked at the Chunin who was smiling at him and then he noticed that he had eaten his ramen slowly for a change. Thinking was really putting him off as his eating speed slowed to an almost normal pace. Naruto looked at the Chunin who looked almost relieved when the kid in front of him had stopped eating and stood up. Naruto mentally chuckled and said, "Iruka-sensei, I'm gonna go home now. Thanks for the ramen." Then Naruto walked away at a slow pace with his mind thinking a mile a minute. He had just felt something strange within his mind and suddenly thought. What if Kyuubi wants to take over my body after he knows that I know of his existence? Then a voice was heard in his mind that made him stumble and land on the floor. "I heard that. I am pleased to inform your bratish self that I am not a member of what you humans call a man. Instead behold my grace." An image of a scantily clad woman dressed only in garments which could be described as an extremely modified kimono which showed all the curves. Naruto's face paled as he saw the 9 tails sticking out of the kimono and the red eyes. The woman was currently standing against a massive cage which held her trapped. Then he got home as fast as possible. He closed the door and let himself fall on the bed. When he fell asleep he noticed that he was standing outside of a massive gate which was covered with locks of all kinds. But the small push the door opened and the locks fell to the floor as the push crumbled them. Then he saw the cage with the gigantic Kitsune no Kitsune within it. The Kitsune hadn't noticed her visitor and was still thrashing in the cage, apparently irritated at something. Naruto coughed briefly and the massive demon turned towards him and said, "What do you want?" Naruto just stared as the Kyuubi once again shifted into young female form and scowled at him and said, "Come to gloat at your prisoner? Come to humiliate the great demon Kyuubi?" Suddenly the smile disappeared and she grabbed his orange jumpsuit and let a tail flick through the bars and immediately it latched onto Naruto and dragged him into the cage. There the Kitsune-turned woman smiled evilly and pressed her lips to the struggling young boys and she let her chakra seep into him. Naruto screeched in pain as the malevolent chakra began eating its way through the chakra paths, making the original chakra disappear. Blood began to pour out of the belly button and soon a pool of blood was formed and the seal was rapidly disintegrating. Not that anyone noticed because no chakra was emitted from the body. Naruto awoke with a startled gasp. One moment he had been kissed by the woman and now he was awake. He looked around and saw that he was bathed in a sticky liquid which was red. He smelled the familiar smell of fresh blood and saw that his jumpsuit was shredded and lay a few meters away from him on the ground. What really managed to make him gasp was the tail that was sticking out of his backbone. He gulped and suddenly he felt a tripping sound and saw that 9 tails now adorned his body. He groaned and said, "Why always me?" Then he looked at the clock and saw that it was almost time for academy classes. A voice was heard in his mind. A voice that came from his tormentor. "Don't you want to kill them? Want to destroy their houses and kill their bodies? Ravish their women and slaughter the men? Destroy their very souls for the hurt they have caused you?" He didn't know what to do and he just stood there and replied back. "Why did you do this to me? What is the use of me gaining tails and claws?" He had just seen his claws that now adorned his hands and almost had ripped off a good chunk of meat off his legs when he scratched an itchy spot. Kyuubi's voice was heard in his mind. "Don't talk out loud you baka. Think about you speaking with me and we can speak. And I merged with you a little. It's just going to heighten your abilities 1,000-fold. But you need to get in shape. And for the love of myself don't wear those ridiculous orange jumpsuits." Naruto thought about the things that had happened to him. The beatings he had to endure from the villagers sometimes when they grew frustrated. The shinobi wouldn't do anything against it. It made him so angry that he wanted to rip them apart into bloody bits and then eat those bits and relish in the sweet taste. Kyuubi was grinning in her cell. Finally she and her container would once again terrorize this world again and cause much needed destruction. Finally she could show the rest of those pricks that she was the undisputed queen of hell. Naruto didn't know it yet, but by giving in to his darker emotions, he would eventually become the monster he had been destined to be, instead of a happy-go-lucky idiot who could only think of ramen and powerful jutsu. Naruto was responsible for the naming of the teams. He was growing bored. Finally he had managed to select an outfit that made Kyuubi agree with the choice. It was a black outfit, one of the rare black or other than orange-colored clothes he had. He had bought it once to play a prank and had forgotten about it. It looked cool on him. He had accidentally bought something a few sizes too big for him, but that didn't matter now. It fit perfectly now since he had grown since the prank which had been 3 years ago. When he heard his name being spoken by Iruka he perked up. Uzumaki Naruto, Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke. Naruto's eye twitched and he felt anger welling up within him. Kyuubi laughed and said. You don't like the Uchiha kid, do you? The anger cropped within you is very powerful. I wish that I could be able to feel the blood splattering all over my body as his body lies on the ground bleeding. Kid, you need to promise me one thing. If you ever fight the Uchiha kid let me take over and I'll kill him. Until then I want you to train harder than anyone. I'll take over your training for now and you'll see results soon. Unknown to anyone, a smile made its way to Naruto's face. This was not his normal cheerful smile. This was a full-blown maniacal smile which would frighten most people to death. Naruto waited for the jounin to come pick them up. He had seen a pretty girl wearing a red coat with something that appeared like bandages on it. He filed away her face for now since it possessed such beautiful red eyes. When the jounin finally appeared, Naruto's eyes had taken a red shine and he looked ready to rip the man apart. The man just entered with a casual greeting like he wasn't late at all. Sakura screeched something about being late and Naruto just kept silent. Inwardly he though. Why can't that stupid bitch shut up? I'd give a fortune for something to let her shut up. Out loud he said. Why were you so late? Kakashi shrugged and said. I got lost on the road of life. Naruto raised an eyebrow and said. Why don't you tell us something about yourself? After all, we had to wait almost 3 hours before you finally showed up. Kakashi shrugged and said. Let's go to the roof then. We can talk there. Naruto did as he was told and soon he was on the roof with Sakura and Sasuke. Inside his head the voice of the great demon fox was heard. He looks really geeky. Are you sure that he can teach you something? Naruto just looked at the jounin and said. Alright. You want to tell us what your name is or do we need to go to the old man and force you to quit teaching us because you were late? I remember hearing from Iruka-sensei about a shinobi rule that states that a shinobi should always appear on time at any assignment even if it is a lame one. Kakashi looked at Naruto with a raised eyebrow and said. That is indeed a rule. But that doesn't mean that I uphold that rule. As for introductions. I am Hada Kakashi and I am a jounin rank ninja. I have many hobbies and I dislike people who abandon their team. You, Pinky, tell me about your likes and dislikes. Sakura looked at the jounin and said. My name is Haruno Sakura. I like it. My hobbies are. And I dislike Ino Pig and Naruto. She glanced at Sasuke with every mention of a sentence. The boy was just staring at Kakashi and as Kakashi said that the breeding kid should tell everyone about himself he answered. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. What I like is none of your business. I don't have a hobby, but it is more of an ambition. I want to kill a certain man. Kakashi thought about that and said. Alright. Now it's your turn to be blonde. Naruto's face contorted briefly into a grimace full of anger and hatred and his eyes briefly turned a blood red. Then he regained his control and said. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, I like Sakura-chan and ramen. My only dislikes are the time it takes for ramen to cook in Sasuke team. Kakashi shrugged and said. Tomorrow we are going to hold a little survival training. Be there around 8 o'clock in the morning. And don't eat. You are going to puke it all out if you do. Then he disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto looked at his teammates and couldn't help but be disgusted with them. Sasuke was a kid with only vengeance on his mind apparently. He had met Itachi a few years ago when he was still a little kid around 5 years old. Itachi had then been promoted to Anbu leader and had trained him for the same time letting him see some of the Anbu techniques. Naruto didn't know why, but Sasuke seemed to be a breeding kid and didn't like to spend time with anyone. The only one that Sasuke looked up to was his older brother. The Uchihas didn't like Naruto being near their house and thus had chased him away a few times. One time Itachi had seen it and then had come to Naruto's house. After eating a bowl of ramen with the kid Itachi had gone back to his house and had left a promise to train Naruto in all, which would become invaluable within time. So Itachi had set out to train Naruto to become a shinobi and had succeeded well. Flashback. The 5-year-old Naruto was standing in a clearing with Itachi standing next to him. The older boy who was around 11 at that time spoke up. The thing that is the prime aspect of a shinobi is stealth. Use the shadows to your own skin and you shall be invisible. Naruto nodded and went into a shadow and tried to disappear. Itachi sighed and said. You have to make yourself almost invisible to your enemy. Like this. Then Itachi stepped into a shadow and seemingly disappeared. Only a blurry image could be seen. Then he appeared behind Naruto and tickled the younger boy's ribs, making the kid laugh. Itachi resumed teaching Naruto about several things that were unmistakable and benevolent at least. Techniques were discussed to make the earth swallow the enemy and immobilize their forces. Apparently Itachi was either thinking that Naruto didn't get the general idea of the lesson, or he was just a genius who thought that Naruto must know as much as he did. And indeed within a few lessons Naruto was able to use a jutsu called Doten. Tsuchi Sutera no Jutsu. It made it possible for him to hide in the earth and then attack from below. Itachi had been proud of his student. So proud that he had taken Naruto out on a small shopping trip and bought him a new set of kunai, coupled with a black jacket and pants. When asked for the reason for buying them, the Uchiha heir just said. I thought that you should wear something less attention-drawing than that orange suit. Black really suits you. Then the Uchiha heir had been whisked away by a pair of Anbu who wanted to talk with him about their next mission. Itachi had smiled at Naruto, and the boy had smiled back. Then the Uchiha massacre had happened and Naruto caught a fleeting look of Itachi as the boy darted over the rooftops and finally disappeared into the forest. Naruto hadn't paid much attention to it, but then he heard about the massacre after a day and he let a tear fall to the ground. Then flashback. But now was a time to rejoice. He would finally get something done here. With a cry of Doten. Tsuchi Sutero no he was hidden in the earth and sneaked up on Sasuke with the idea of pranking him a little. Kyuubi snickered in his mind and said. Try this, kid. Then information was suddenly being uploaded into his brain and suddenly he knew a jutsu which would shock the boy. He appeared out of the ground behind Sasuke and softly he said. No. Sasuke knew that someone was standing behind him and when he turned around he saw a very voluptuous naked woman standing there with a grin on her face. She leaned over and said. You want to have me as a pretty boy? Then catch me. Naruto in female form jumped at Sasuke who just did what anyone would do when having another person flying at them with great speed. He extended his arms and Naruto landed on them and snuggled a little, making some blood trickle out of Sasuke's nose. Then Naruto decided to stop playing around and he rose and his breasts hit Sasuke's face and got covered with blood as Sasuke's nose exploded in a shower of blood. Kyuubi grinned in his mind and she briefly began to rattle the cage she was kept in and shouted. Go get him Naruto. That's my boy. Woohoo. After Kyuubi's applause he paused and looked at Sasuke with an evil grin forming on his face. Then he got toward Sasuke and got him out of his clothes and grabbed some rope and then tied him with a rope and hung him off the ceiling clothed in only his boxers. A few hours later the person who found Sasuke was Iruka who had just finished a mission. After hearing the amazing story about the woman Iruka just blinked and shrugged. It wasn't really his concern. Naruto went to bed that night with a devilish smirk on his face while the yokai within his mind was partying about something and shouting things like that she would want to get within his pants. Of course Naruto knew nothing of the birds and the bees or else he would have blushed like crazy. One extremely horny Kyuubi no Kitsune sat in her cage within the body of the boy she had grown to like. Going without sex was just as bad as going without killing. Damn, she either wanted to kill something or just wanted to have a man pleasure her. Is that too much to ask of her? Sighing, she just decided to do it on her own and work off some stress. The dreams that Naruto had did give very much information about the female body. After all, when one spirit is bound to another they should be able to watch anything they do. Shurin. He looked over the clearing and saw that his teammates were already there. He grinned briefly and then shouted. Hi Sakura-chan. Sakura didn't react to that and Naruto faked being hurt by that small gesture. In reality it didn't do much to him except annoy him to no end. The girl should be more professional and not think about loving Sasuke or something like that. They should be working like a team or something and not have one girl fawning over a boy. Naruto briefly envisioned a scenario where he was standing all alone while Sakura fawned over a hurt Sasuke and immediately he thought back to his lessons with Itachi-sensei. Flashback. Itachi was standing on the field with a determined expression on his face. He looked at the student he was training in secret and smiled briefly. It looked so nice to him. Then he started to talk. Teamwork is everything Naruto. It doesn't matter if your mission fails, but if you all work together you shall survive. That is one lesson that I learned when I was a kid. I graduated from the academy at 5 and then became a Chunin at 6. Then I got promoted to Jounin 2 years later. And now I am an Anbu captain. I'll teach you techniques to survive in the harsh world which will do nothing but kill you. You know that you have the Kitsune Yakai sealed within your stomach, right? Naruto nodded and said. She often talks to me about things. Like why I should let those villagers beat me into a pulp. She has asked if she could take over my body for a few moments letting her do some damage to them, but I refused. If I did that then I would be killed immediately. I got in contact with her when I was 5. Itachi nodded and said. Yeah, I heard something about you getting beaten up by some villagers. They were killed so I didn't do very much about it. Do you still remember when we met? Naruto grinned and said. Yes. You were walking with that nice girl Anko and talking about something when I accidentally ran into you after running from a mob that was intent on killing me. She really showed them with those snakes coming out of her trench coat. It was so nice to hear their screams. It was like music to my ears to watch them scream as they were biting. Too bad no blood was spilled. I like to see it drop from wounds and then fall to the floor. Are you going to teach me a new technique, Itachi-sensei? Itachi nodded and said. Watch and learn. Then Itachi did some dragon and tiger seals, coupled with a few fox seals which were done in slow motion for Naruto. Then Itachi shouted. Ninjutsu? Chisio Fanshutsu no Jutsu. Then the cage bunshin of Itachi began to bleed from all over, letting the red liquid fall to the ground with dull drips. Itachi had made a cage bunshin to test this on, and Naruto watched the results as the bleeding increased, and then finally the cage bunshin exploded in a shower of blood and then disappeared with a pop and a puff of smoke. Naruto was staring at his teacher with his mouth open and said. Wow. What an awesome technique. Let me try. Itachi nodded and created another cage bunshin. Naruto looked at the cage bunshin and then began making the seals. As he was finished he shouted. Ninjutsu? Chisio Fanshutsu no Jutsu. Then the same thing happened but more violently. Blood began to spurt out of wounds that weren't there and pooled rapidly on the floor. The clone barely had time to make a sound as blood began to pour out of his mouth, and then in an eruption which sounded like a thunderclap, it erupted with blood flying high into the air and making a rain of blood come down. Then flashback. Naruto was jerked out of his thoughts as Kakashi arrived. With a shout that he was late together with Sakura, he managed to keep up his idiot facade. When Kakashi explained the test, Naruto mentally snorted. With his Kyuubi enhanced strength and speed, it would be almost no challenge to him. But still he kept up his facade to be regarded as a dumb idiot like it always planned. Kyuubi smiled inside his mind and said. Well kid, it seems that you only need to help your teammates. If that's the only thing you need to do then I'll go to sleep. She smiled within her young kid's mind. She was still locked in the cage in his stomach but found that she was able to enhance certain body parts to her liking. They would probably be written off as puberty happening early, but she liked messing with his body. She had increased his intelligence by several notches, making him capable of inventing genius-like strategies within a second. Then she had tweaked his body a little bit, letting him gain more muscle mass. Then she had tampered with his normal human chakra reserves a lot to make them so large that they would be able to channel demonic chakra. Naruto looked at the jounin that had them do this little test. He was just plain annoyed at the thinly veiled comment that they should work together, and he went over to Sakura to get her to work with him. Come on Sakura-chan. Let's work together and beat Kakashi-sensei. Sakura gave him a cold look and said. Sasuke-kun is far better than Naruto. Just shut up and watch Sasuke-kun. Then she went back to staring as Sasuke attacked Kakashi. Sasuke was easily blocked and Naruto jumped out from the hiding place and ran at the jounin while making seals. Then with a cage bunshin he attacked when he had finished some seals and it had appeared. Kakashi didn't show surprise but just dodged the attacks and Naruto looked at Sasuke and said. Thanks for distracting him. I hope Sakura will do her part. Then he attacked again, this time with more gusto, and soon Kakashi was forced to dodge at an accelerated speed as the punches and kicks were getting faster and the kunai that were thrown were coming faster and faster. Kyuubi was having fun at the moment. She loved showing that lazy jounin who was boss. And the fact that she was adding her own speed to the boy's body, it would be easy to get the jounin to accept defeat. Mentally she got some good surprises planned for the jounin. Once the boy learned her ninjutsu they would be invincible. Now she just cheered on him while wearing something extremely skimpy in nature, like a far too small kimono, which showed a lot of cleavage, which would make Jiraiya blush. After all, she had large assets which were bouncing now as she cheered on Naruto. Come on Naruto. Beat that guy's ass. Whip it raw. Naruto watched as Sakura dove in at the jounin and snatched the bells. She did that probably on Sasuke's order, but it didn't matter. Naruto stopped fighting immediately. Kakashi noticed it and immediately stopped defending too. He was astonished at how the kid could give him a good fight. This was not normal even for a genin who was a dead last. Kakashi stopped and watched as Naruto gave Sakura one of the bells and said. You can eat. I think I'll just go without food for now. The team needs to be at full strength and you need it. She took the food and began eating slowly. Kakashi just stared at the team. They had grasped the meaning of this exercise immediately without him having to tie one to the tree. He blinked a few times and said. You pass. Sasuke looked at their teacher and smirked arrogantly. He hadn't known that the moron could actually let them become true genin by just sharing food. It was probably because the kid loved that girl Sakura or something, but Sasuke didn't care. I need to kill my brother as soon as possible. But for that I will need power. As Sasuke thought about his victory that would inevitably follow after killing his brother, he didn't notice that he was about to be left alone by the team members that were walking away. He noticed when Naruto decided to wake him up a little by shouting in his ear. "Sasuke team, come with us." Sasuke almost fell over at the sound and regained his wit soon and looked at the beating Naruto was given by Sakura, who shouted and screamed at him for shouting in Sasuke-kun's ear. Kyuubi smiled in Naruto's mind. She had finally done something to awaken puberty within Naruto's body and thus it would grow rapidly. She grabbed herself and moaned deeply. She would need some relief tonight as she had seen a fantasy that was in Naruto's subconscious mind which had tremendously excited her. It was one of her and him together with whipped cream and some other things. Naruto blushed a beet red as his mind was suddenly bombarded with mental images of naked women and he briefly gulped as he looked around in the cage that was Kyuubi's prison. He looked at the hot naked kitsune and blushed. She was sitting on a bed with red sheets in the color of blood and was pleasuring herself. When she noticed him she stopped and said. "Naruto-kun. I want to teach you something every boy should be taught. It is time for the talk." Naruto gulped as he had heard of the talk from his friends. They had just stammered a few times and were uneasy whenever a girl came close to them. He hadn't gotten the idea behind it, but when he woke up that morning he noticed that his underwear was soiled and that he'd have to wash it quickly to get the white stains out of it. Kyuubi had taken the initiative and had shown him exactly what she was talking about. It still made him blush at her expert lecture on it. But what she had done to him was rather pleasant. That was all there was to it. Haku? Naruto was getting bored. He had to do jobs that weren't suited for a ninja of his caliber. Kyuubi had assured him that he should at least be able to do an A-rank mission with the knowledge that was within his mind and that he could do it. Those that were kinjutsu were the ones that he could do best. Yokai jutsu were also very good under his control as he was able to call up a Kage Bunshin and endow it with the spirit of Kyuubi who took that opportunity. She now created a habit of making herself a Kage Bunshin and appearing in different places. One time she had surprised him by jumping onto him while he was in the shower. A wrestling match had ensued between Kitsune and Naruto, which had ended in Kyuubi overpowering Naruto by a great margin and him ending up getting slammed into the wall. Iruka had looked at him strangely when he entered a few seconds after that and Naruto had just grumbled something about women being too strong for their own good and had gone back into the shower and had forcibly thrown out Kyuubi, who slammed into Iruka who got a nosebleed after looking at her big tits. When he had come back to the land of the living he only saw Naruto standing there looking sheepish at him. With a vivid image of breasts still in his head Iruka asked Naruto. "Who was that woman, Naruto? I don't think I had the pleasure to meet her yet. And please tell me how the hell she got into your shower." Naruto just stared at him and said. "It's none of your business how she got into my shower. And I don't even know how she got in there. Usually she just sneaks into bed with me. Damn hentai always trying to get me to sleep with her." Iruka just looked stupefied at the scene in front of him. The apparent dope was now holding a small conversation with him about a pervert woman who sneaked into his bed. Since when had the kid been so smart as to actually complain about those things and not just shrug them off as ignorance? Then Iruka finally processed the conversation entirely and said. "Why would she sleep with you?" A strange grin made its way to the Chunin's face and Naruto just smirked and said. "Sexual intercourse is often referred to as sleeping with someone. That's exactly what she tried to do. Don't worry Iruka-sensei. I'll keep her under control." Kyuubi snickered within Naruto's mind. "He doesn't have a chance in hell if you ask me. He couldn't even stand up to me if I was in heat. Kitsune often needs sex for a long time and I think that you need some release soon." Then she retreated from his thoughts and Naruto just said. "Don't worry Iruka-sensei. I'll take care of her. Are we going for ramen?" Then Naruto cast a genjutsu around Iruka which would make him believe that everything was just a figment of his imagination. It was a cool jutsu that had been taught to him by someone who hadn't started his name to Naruto. Naruto had learned it at a very young age. The only thing he could remember from that mysterious sensei was that he had yellow snake-like eyes and black long hair and wore a jounin uniform and that it was a tall man. Naruto just used it on Iruka and got a mental applause from Kyuubi and just smiled seemingly at nothing. Then he decided that there would need to be some entertainment and when he got back to his home, he noticed several things. That Kakashi was relaxing in one chair while reading his book. Naruto just sniffed disdainfully and said. "The Kakashi-sensei. Why are you here?" Kakashi looked at Naruto and said. "Naruto. Hokage-sama has decreed that we are to do a C-rank mission since we have already done all our assigned missions for this week. We are to protect a man named Tazuna and we will be expected to leave within 10 minutes. Pack your bags and we'll be off." Naruto nodded and Kyuubi came out in a Kage Bunshin. Her 9 tails swung in the air as they flashed and started to fill a small backpack, which was now filled with kunai and other shinobi gear. Soon it was packed and she smirked at him and kissed him on the lips and then disappeared in a poof of smoke. Naruto looked at the place where she had last been and then sighed and slung the backpack over his shoulder and noticed that Kakashi was about to leave and said, "Kakashi-sensei waits for me." Kakashi nodded at his loud student, never even suspecting that it might be an act. When they reached the gate, Sakura and Sasuke were already there with Tazuna. The fat man looked at Naruto and said, "Is that little boy going to protect me? I should have hired a team which is more up to the task of protecting me." Kakashi just shrugged while restraining Naruto, who was frothing at the mouth with rage. Of course it was all an act, but it seemed real. While threatening the old man with death threats and other things, Naruto just studied the man and noticed that no fear was emitted from the man. Ah well, he'd get his chance to make the man fear him. There were 2 Chunin from Kurigakure hidden in a small puddle of water, but Naruto didn't pay attention to it. He didn't want to rouse suspicion by knowing about them. As they came up behind him, he pretended to act scared like a genin. It didn't matter very much because they were defeated by Kakashi easily. The trip continued and Naruto found himself wishing that something exciting would happen. He looked around for something to do and saw suddenly the shape of a man coming through the trees at speeds of jounin variety towards them. Naruto knew that this should be a good time to finally get some action, and he ducked as a giant sword came from the mist, and Kakashi's quickly yelled command to duck saved the lives of Sakura and Sasuke and Tazuna. Naruto just looked at the man who had caught the sword again, and with a smile being hinted at on his lips, he grinned, a smile not unlike the kitsune which was sealed within him. It didn't have to be very entertaining to fight with this man, but he knew that he'd have his fun. Kyuubi hinted at the presence of someone else nearby, and Naruto took a look at the trees and noticed a Kurigakure hunter nin and relaxed a little. If they were on that guy's trail, then he didn't need to show much of his arsenal. As Kakashi ordered them to guard Tazuna, a plan formed into Naruto's mind. If Kakashi somehow got distracted, it would allow him to attack the strange guy. Nukinin or not, the man must have some technique to help him. Of course, Kyuubi could lend her eyes and let him copy it. It was even better than the Sharingan as it allowed him to copy those techniques easily. When the battle was joined, Naruto paid close attention to the techniques used and didn't think very much of it. They were just using techniques that normal Chunin could also use. When Kakashi upped the ante a little, he was captured within a dome of water, and Sasuke took that as his clue to attack, and when Zabuza conjured up some clones, Sasuke managed to slash one of them and it fell apart in a watery splash. Sasuke knew that he should get out of the range of the sword that Zabuza had and was trying to work out a plan to free his teacher. He would learn those techniques that they used even if it killed him. Naruto sighed as he began to gather his chakra. It didn't matter very much to him if his teammates died. They were just a distraction along the way to greatness. If the greatness was through terror, then so be it. He watched as Sasuke threw a shuriken and then switched himself with a shuriken and became it through a henge. Then he was evaded by Zabuza and then he threw a shuriken at the man, causing him to evade it and release Kakashi. The 2 jounin fought with each other and no victor seemed to be decided, and suddenly Zabuza was hit in the neck by a pair of senbon needles. Naruto looked at the person who had thrown the needles and immediately sensed something off. This person didn't carry the same feelings of anger for Zabuza, but instead they carried determination to accomplish a goal. He felt himself probing deeper within the strange person's feelings and found a desire to be loved. And also a sadness too deep to describe. The hunter nin took Zabuza's body away and Tazuna guided them to his home, where they were greeted by a young woman who apparently was his daughter. They were treated well and Naruto was shown a room where he could sleep with Sasuke. Naruto didn't have any intention of hearing the boy rant in his sleep, so Naruto suggested that he sleep on the roof or something. Before the kind woman could say anything, a boy that seemed to be around 8 interjected with some comment about Naruto and company all going to die at Gatu's hands. Naruto had given a response in his usual style, namely shouting something about him beating everyone and becoming Hokage, and that the kid should believe in himself. The next few days were filled with exercises to control chakra. Naruto just acted like he couldn't control his chakra, while in truth he was very adept in controlling it. Sasuke and he were progressing along the same lines of both increasing in skill every time they ran up those trees and fell down. Naruto just sighed and tried to climb up again. He could do it perfectly but didn't want them to know about it. He needed to keep his cover until he was sure that he wouldn't be crossed. The 6th day after the meeting with Zabuza was a strange one. Naruto had given up on his training and said that he'd rather relax for a while until that Zabuza dude got back. Kakashi had told them that the hunter nin was an accomplice of Zabuza who had taken him somewhere to recover. Naruto looked at the girl that came up to him while wearing a pink kimono. She had her hair cascading over her back. She looked cute. Naruto smiled as he looked at her and said, "Hello." She greeted him politely and Naruto couldn't help but ask her why she was here. Why are you here? I don't think it's safe for a pretty girl like you out here. She smiled at him and said. I can protect myself. Tell me something. Have you ever had a person who is so precious that you want to protect him or her with your life? Naruto briefly thought about it and said. Yes. She and I are closer than anyone. She and I are bound together by an ancient jutsu. I know that she loves me and I love her with my soul. She's been a mother to me and a lover. She is closer to me than anyone else at the moment. With time it could change, but we'll always be bound to each other. She looked at him strangely and said. I hope that I and my precious person can also be so happy. I would like to protect him with my life if the situation called for it. He was the only one to accept me for who I am. Naruto just looked at her and said. Is he Momochi's abuser? Haku's eyes momentarily widened in shock but then narrowed. So you know about my precious person. Do you know why I saved him from your sensei? Naruto smiled at her and said. The only thing that I know is that your master isn't a real demon. The only demon I know of was the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Why you followed him and saved him is easily explained. You care for him. Don't worry, I won't tell anything to Kakashi. He probably is off training the Uchiha. He doesn't know the mental trouble that I go through every moment. Haku relaxed slightly and said. Well then, what do you intend to do about the battle that would inevitably follow the confrontation between my master and your sensei? If he tries to kill my master, then I would have to rescue him. Naruto looked at her with a serious look on his face and said. As long as I draw breath, I shall protect everyone who is intent on harming anyone close to me. Even strangers I would protect. But no Konoha citizen will be safe from my wrath. They have made me out to be a monster. If they make me that way, then I shall become one. After all, my precious person is the yokai sealed within my stomach. Haku processed most of the information that had been given in the conversation, and she paid heed to the words that the Kyuubi was one of the only yokai that the boy was familiar with, and added it all up together and came to one conclusion that was immediately spoken. You have the great Kitsune yokai Kyuubi sealed within your stomach. They sealed it within a child. Indeed, that would be called a precious person. Even if it is a yokai, it still can be called a precious person. But we are slipping off topic. Tell me your name. Naruto nodded and said. My legal name is Uzumaki Naruto. My personal name I give myself is Naruto the Yokai King, as in essence, I am royalty with the Queen of Yokai sealed within me. Kyuubi added something in his head. That's the most gorgeous Yokai Queen for you, kid. No matter what you say about me, my title is Kyuubi, Queen of the Nine Hells. Naruto frowned and said. Her official title is Kyuubi, Queen of the Nine Hells. Haku just looked at him and said. Well, my name is Yukikage Haku. Pleased to meet you, Yokai-san. Naruto grinned at her with his foxy grin and said. Call me Naruto. And the Yokai-san can be left out as I haven't used that title yet. Haku just smiled kindly and said. When do you expect to be able to care for your precious person if you have no physical person to care for? No love for him or her, just for some spectral being within you and bound by seals. Naruto thought about it and said. Well then, if I got a girlfriend or someone like that, I would be able to care for him or her. Then they would be called a precious person. Their conversation about precious people and various things progressed until the sun was high up in the air and Haku remembered that she should go back to her master. After all, it wouldn't do for her master to remain without his tool for long. When she got back to Zabuza, she got an inquisitive look and immediately told the man what had happened. Momochi's Zabuza was a clever man. He was able to kill all the genins of the Mist exam without him being one. That gave him his nickname Demon of the Mist. He opened his eyes after he had closed them to think better. Then he said. So it seems that the student of Sharingan Kakashi is quite averse to his own village and has a yokai sealed within him. Maybe I could use him as another tool. Come on Haku, let's move and kill the old man and get our money. She nodded and within mere seconds they were gone. Naruto meanwhile had come upon the idea to create his own comic book, which he eagerly started working on. He knew that it wasn't perfect, but at least with Kyuubi's help he could try. You need to accentuate the busts of the female characters a little bit like Naruto. That way it would be far more effective than simply making them as huge as possible. There are some men who like that, but I don't. I like women who have breasts that are nice and soft and not like melons. Like mine, for instance. She jumped once and made her breasts bounce once. Naruto just smiled and drew the motion within the comic, and soon the lead character Akiko was clothed within Jounin uniform and was currently engaged in battle with a group of stone nin. She defeated them and when she got back she got rewarded. The drawings were of such detail that Naruto forgot to add the normal censure like it was usual in perverted books. When Kakashi came to see where his loudmouth student was, he was drawn to the sight of Naruto drawing within a small notebook. What are you drawing? Naruto turned around and saw his Jounin sensei. He looked at the man and said. Just some drawings of Kakashi sensei. He hid the book within the folds of his clothes and then got up and said. When are you going to teach me a new jutsu, Kakashi-sensei? Sometime later, Naruto. Now let's go back to Tsunami-san and Tazuna-san. Hi sensei. They went back to the bridge builder's home and Naruto ate a lovely meal prepared by Tsunami. The next day would be the one where Zabuza was going to show up and Naruto was almost giddy with excitement. He looked at the house where he had been left because he had to take care of some things. The hiding of his comic wasn't very easy. He went outside and saw two men harassing the Tsunami. A grin grew on his face and within 2 milliseconds the men had a kunai lodged right between the eyes. They fell over dead and Naruto just grinned and his eyes turned red. Let's give them a taste of the power of Naruto and Kyuubi-chan. Naruto grinned and he jumped onto a tree and started to run as fast towards the bridge that was being built. When he got there he looked at the scenery and noticed Kakashi fighting with Zabuza and Sakura guarding Tazuna. The weak child was even looking scared at the prospect of having to fight a Jounin. Naruto just looked at the scene of Sasuke trying to fight the pretty girl named Haku. A smile appeared on his face as it seemed that Sasuke was going to be beaten. But the speed that was close to being a blur he jumped into the mirrors and he looked at every reflection of Haku. The pity that we are on opposite sides. It would be nice to see you in another situation but this means that I got to fight. Naruto got in a ready stance and was about to launch an assault on the mirrors but Sasuke just looked at him and said. Stuff it done. I can handle this guy by myself. Naruto watched as Sasuke was being filled with needles like some sort of pincushion and he smiled. Too bad that you don't have a Yaokai within your Haku. It would have been a pretty nice thing to see them duel. Haku just gave a mysterious smile and said. This technique is the demonic ice mirrors. I got one sealed up within me but it isn't very visible to the outside. It was done by sealing it within my inner coils. I think that yours is being bound by some sort of death seal. Am I correct? Naruto just nodded after getting a small mental fragment of comment by Kyuubi involving something about sealing methods. When he saw icy spikes come from the mirror he knew that it wasn't very healthy to be caught within them and with a piercing yell the sound vibrations shattered the ice and the chakra from the Kyuubi shot out from the seal and demolished the mirrors. Haku tried to drop down on Naruto with an ice spike to impale him. He looked at her and suddenly Kyuubi spoke up in his mind. Want me to help you a little? This could be fun. She has one of the ice dragons within her if I'm not mistaken. It looks like the coils are frozen. It didn't look odd to me at first when we met her, but now it all clicks together. Let's warm the girl up a little. The manifestation of chakra appeared and 9 tails wrapped around the girl falling down on Naruto. It looked odd to see a girl of around 15 being wrapped up within blood-red chakra, but to the spectators it was a horrific sight. They waited until the girl was ripped apart by the chakra, but that moment never came. Instead the clothes incinerated by some unseen heat and the air was sucked out from the region, making Haku fall into unconsciousness due to the sudden loss of air and pressure of air. Naruto looked around and felt the chakra of people standing just on the opposite side of the bridge. Zabuza and Kakashi got distracted and looked at the battle while Kakashi was still in an attacking pose. Atu talked about getting rid of some thrash and Zabuza took offense to his slight jab at Haku. Pity she was so rude as to break my arm. I'm sure the men would love to have her as a slave for their hard work. Naruto's and Zabuza's eyes twitched at that statement and intense killing intent came from the both of them, although Naruto toned him down somewhat. It wouldn't make the prey die of a heart attack. Zabuza was the first to move. With an almost bestial growl he charged at Gato with a kunai he got from Naruto who had thrown it in some attempt to hurt the man. Although Naruto hadn't really aimed to kill, the man had grabbed it with his mouth and he charged into the crowd of men and slashed while getting cut by a blade that one of the hirelings wielded. Finally Zabuza got to Gato and looked into the man's eyes. Then he cut upwards and Gato's neck was sliced open. Chakra molded itself into a pattern very reminiscent of a demon and Gato fell into the waves. Zabuza collapsed. Naruto looked at the horde of men that were currently about to go and destroy the country of waves. Kakashi made about 50 kg bunshin and Naruto did the same. The hirelings looked at the horde of clones and gulped. It would be suicide to go against so many at once. The crossbow bolt embedded itself in front of the hirelings and Inari appeared with a horde of wave countrymen armed with pitchforks and other weaponry. The men fled for their lives and jumped into the water just to get away. Naruto smiled as he knew that Kakashi deserved some rest. He looked around and saw Haku's limp body. He went over and picked up her unconscious body. He got out of his jacket and draped it over her body. She shouldn't get sick or else she might die. Sentimental, kid. It seems that you carry some sort of affection for the girl. As long as she doesn't kill you it's okay with me. Naruto just gave a wry smile and he looked around to see if Pinky was somewhere and there he saw her fussing over Sasuke. Couldn't the pink bitch see that her precious Sasuke wasn't in need of her care? Tazuna was the one who needed to be protected at all costs. He carried Haku over towards the motionless body of Mamachi Zabuza. He looked at the man and sighed. How the hell was he going to explain this to the girl? Sorry, but your master died. Would you commit suicide or would you let us kill you? He noticed the slight heaving of the chest area that indicated that Zabuza was still alive. He looked at it and said. Zabuza-san, can you hear me? The man lifted his head weakly and said with a voice that was totally unlike his normal confident one. You're the kid that beat Haku. Come to finish me off, kid. Naruto just shook his head and said. No. I know that you are going to die and can do nothing to help you get better. All I want to do is give Haku one last chance to say goodbye. He did a medicine he had learned from Kyuubi to wake the unconscious or the drained of energy and let them work once again for 15 minutes, but then they would need to rest for a day. Haku awoke and looked at the sky. Then the memories came back and she looked around and saw her master. Zabuza-sama. He looked at her and said. Haku. My end is drawing near. I want you to go and live your life to the fullest. What's your name, kid? Uzumaki Naruto, I presume it is. At Naruto's nod, Zabuza continued. I'd like you to take care of Haku for me. Care for her well and make her happy. That's all I ask. Haku had tears streaming down her face and Naruto made a small soothing noise. He looked at Zabuza again and said. I'll make sure that you get buried properly and make sure that it isn't desecrated by those hunter nin. Zabuza-san, I'll take care of Haku like she was one of my precious persons and in time she may become just that. I hope you will find happiness in the afterlife. Zabuza closed his eyes and breathed his last breath. A smile was on his face and Naruto closed the man's eyes. He stared at the body for a few seconds before the tears came. Kyuubi and Naruto might be cold and heartless, but this was such a touching moment that it would stay etched within their memories forever. The love for a student that was so overpowering that the teacher would risk his life for the student. Zabuza was buried without the knowledge of Kakashi. Haku had hid the moment that Sasuke awoke with Zabuza's body, and the next day while Kakashi was recovering, Zabuza was buried in a private ceremony just between Naruto and Haku. He looked at the grave which was marked by the huge katana that Zabuza used and then began to make demonic seals. Soon a barrier appeared around the grave which would only allow 2 people inside. Naruto and Haku. If they died it would become totally sealed off to any human while keeping the grave intact against anyone and against time. Naruto told Haku that she should wait in the surroundings and then join up with the group later after she got a change of clothing. The clothes that she used for battle were just a little bit too familiar to Sasuke and Kakashi. With her hair long and in a different style, then it should be okay for her to travel with them. Haku nodded and got the pretty kimono out of the bag she had with her. Is this good? Then I can wear my hair long and without something keeping it up. Naruto nodded. See you later, Haku-chan. This was only the beginning of the turbulent times that Konoha would face when the Kyuubi no Kitsune would reawaken. Haku vs Pinky. She looked at the road ahead and noticed that it looked like there were some people coming. She knew that Naruto-kun had asked her to go and wait for them here. She looked at the sky and marveled at the beauty of it. She always felt so at peace staring at it. She looked at the road again and there she saw the familiar head of blonde hair with the perverted guy that was Hada Kakashi walking next to the brooding guy she had defeated just 3 days ago. A tear slid down her cheek as she thought back to the fight between Zabuza and Gatu's mercenaries. He had died to defend her honor. The pink-haired girl looked to be ecstatic about something and when they came within earshot she picked up a fragment of what the girl was saying. Kun, why not go out with me on a date when we get back in the village? No. The kid seemed to be getting colder than ever. Haku wondered how she would be able to stand the little brat. Sure, Naruto-kun might provide her with someone to talk about loss. She had the great dragon Ryu Mizujiri sealed within her from birth. It came with a bloodline limit that a dragon of the icy kind had to be sealed within the heir of the clan, and even because her mother hadn't wanted her to become one of the members of the clan she couldn't refuse it and had actually used a pendant that contained the spirits of ice dragons and had sealed one into her. When they reached her she looked at Naruto and he nodded and walked over to her. Hi miss. What are you doing here all by yourself? Just traveling towards Konohagakure for a change of scenery, kid. Naruto apparently decided that he should act like some untrained bumpkin and shouted. Don't call me kid. I'm going to be the Hokage one day. Naruto looked at her and let a small smile slip to his face. He looked exactly like the dumb moron everyone thought him to be and was currently one of the most powerful shinobi from his age group that he had met. Sure, he couldn't beat Kakashi easily, but with some amount of skill, he could beat the genin easily even without relying on Kyuubi's power. Said pervert was looking at the pretty girl and perverted thoughts were running through his head as he said. We are from Konohagakure and are just returning from a mission. Would you like to travel with us, young lady? She let a blush slip onto her face and said. I cannot pay for your help, mister. I don't have any money with me since my sensei died. Kakashi looked at her and found that there was something familiar about her but couldn't think of it at the moment. For all he knew, she could be one of those porn stars he had read about in the latest issue of that magazine that was especially made for men who like to look at women, especially conditioned in the right areas, and would fuck for money. She looked at the man and winked at him, making the older pervert turn red with the icky thoughts he got. "Sure, we'll protect you, miss." The answer from Konoha's #1 technique specialist surprised Sasuke a little, but when he looked at her a little better he said, "You are that boy I fought against." Naruto knew that Sasuke had said something that would incite Haku to go onto a homicidal killing spree. He watched as her eyes took on a blue tint and the temperature in the area chilled to the point that several on the grass leaves were frozen. She looked at the Uchiha brat and said to a tiny thing that was as cold as the freezing air around her. "A boy, you say? Does this look like a boy's chest to you?" Then she grabbed the front part of her kimono and ripped it open. Breasts bounced a little as the kimono was opened and the undershirt momentarily disappeared with a small burst of kitsune chakra that was dispensed without the jounin noticing. Kakashi started once at the student of Zabuza's chest before keeling over in a dead faint. The sight of real live flesh was just too much for his perverted senses. Even if he was an open pervert, he never met a girl who exposed her breasts in public. Sasuke was stunned at the display. As Haku was standing close, he reached forwards and touched one of the breasts, incidentally the right one, and squeezed it. The look that came from Haku's eyes could have killed men who were so dumb as to mention fattest in the presence of Choji. Then Sasuke's nose erupted in a geyser of blood splattering Haku's pink kimono. Looking at what Sasuke had done and then at the still raging female furry, Naruto decided to watch the show as he saw Pinky come up and start harassing Haku. And yes, the girl was really mad at Haku-chan. "You black-haired slut. How dare you expose your chest at Sasuke-kun," was the first sentence that came out of Sakura's mouth, and Haku's undershirt reappeared as the kitsune chakra did its magic again. Haku straightened out her kimono and looked at the girl and then at the two unconscious guys. Kakashi's mask was bloody with all the blood that had left the nose of the man and was now streaming down his neck. Haku wondered if she had actually shown something like her genitals to the man, if he would have died from blood loss. Now the underdeveloped girl had to say something about it. "Why do you call me a slut? If the Uchiha kid had asked you to suck him off, would you do it?" Sakura looked at that confused. "Why would I suck on Sasuke? It's not like he is some sort of lollipop. You stay away from my Sasuke-kun." Haku just snickered and began to look another way. "Shut up, Pinky, I'm thinking of a way to get your stupid gay crush to wake up. Naruto-kun, please help me help Haddock-san to get up." Naruto was about to go and help her put Kakashi in a sitting position, but Sakura interrupted his movement by saying, "Now you are going after Naruto Baka too. You really are such a slut that you would happily go and show your tits to him too." Haku just glared at the girl and said, "Listen, Pinky. If he isn't complaining, then it must either mean that he's used to you calling him a baka or that he just is too stupid to acknowledge the fact that you are a no-talent shinobi who should get executed the moment she exited the academy. In Kurigakure it was totally different. You had to beat the student you were assigned to into a pulp unless you wanted to get beaten into a pulp. I'll show you why I was one of the most feared of the Kurigakure hunter nin little girls. Ever heard of the ice dragon of Kurigakure? It is a good thing that I don't have any mission to kill you, or else I would have ripped you apart the moment I laid eyes on you." Naruto just grinned like an idiot. "She sure is protective of you, isn't she? This might get interesting. I think this is what humans classify as a rivalry or a catfight that might occur any moment. If Kakashi doesn't wake up soon, he's gonna find a bloody student of his. Humans are so weak when they see the barest hint of flesh. Hey, I'm human and yet you have deemed me worthy of being your mate. Baka. Did you forget that we are one now? When we first met you accepted the change that made you a demon. By the way, I think that you should apologize for the insult of thinking that I would have let a human have sex with me. You are giving head tonight instead of me." Naruto watched the proceedings with the pink-haired girl and Haku as they glared at each other. Kakashi woke up a few hours later and Sasuke was carried by Sakura as she still sent glares. That night they made camp and Kakashi said that Konohagakure was still a day walking from the position they were at. There were 3 tents. One for Kakashi, one for Sasuke and Naruto, and one for Haku and Sakura. The girls had similar twitches in their eyes and they vowed to kill the other if they made a peep during the night. The next day Haku came to the discovery that somehow she had fallen asleep and was now currently nestled against a blonde demon carrier who was still sleeping soundly. Where Sasuke was could only be one big question mark. She looked at the sleeping kid and decided to have some fun. Gently she took her hair and messed it up like she had a wild night. With a devious grin on her face, she exited the tent to find Kakashi getting out of his own and then freeze as he saw her get out of the tent that was definitely not the girl's tent. A squeal of joy was heard and Kakashi turned his head to the girl's tent only to find Sasuke shooting out of it with a rapid pace, which only the morbidly embarrassed could. He was currently naked as the day he was born and in possession of a blush on his face. Kakashi could only watch as he knocked Haku down and scooted into the tent. Not pleased with a naked boy crawling over her. She looked back and saw Sasuke in the process of putting on some boxers. Noticing that Naruto's face was currently adorned with an almost diabolical smile, she grinned too and got out of the tent. Naruto followed mere minutes after that. We had fun, didn't we, Naru-kun? Making sure that the pink girl got naked into that tent and then placing Uchiha next to her equally naked must have been a dream of hers for a long time. I wonder how the parents of Pinky are going to take the fact that she had slept with a naked boy. By the way, you are much larger than the Uchiha in size. Naruto grinned and looked at Kakashi, who had a look of utter astonishment on his face and clearly was shocked by the prank he had done. With a smile eerily reminiscent of a certain kitsune yokai sealed within his belly, he walked towards his sensei and grabbed a face mask and pulled it down and finally looked at his sensei's face. With a grin matching Naruto's, Haku looked at Kakashi. She looked at a relatively normal face which could have been called cute if someone ever got to see it. Then the man pulled it up again and looked at her. He raised an eyebrow at her and Naruto but didn't comment on it. Haku ate breakfast calmly while Sakura was still hyper like a schoolgirl after looking at Sasuke's reproductive organs. The way back was slightly uneventful and as they were only 3 hours walking away from Konoha's gates, Haku had enough of the girl. If she made another comment about how fantastic Sasuke-kun was or how much of a baka Naruto-kun was, she was going to teach the girl a lesson that she wouldn't forget very soon. You baka. You insult Sasuke-kun again, you baka, then I will kill you. She had enough of the constant shouting of the girl and grabbed Sakura by her throat and said, "Shut up. Your whiny voice is irritating me." All she got in response was a kick to the stomach and soon the fight was on. Haku grabbed the hair of the younger girl and pulled onto it, making the pink brat scream in pain while punching Haku right in the face. Naruto just watched the fight with a stunned look on his face. Sakura actually lost some parts of her hair that were ripped out. Haku sported several marks on her face which looked to be bruised. On the side of Sakura he saw a split lip and several injuries that looked like they would remain for a while, as the bruises were a lot worse than Haku had. And once again he watched a struggle between the girls as they once again rolled on the floor, beating out the shit of each other. He guessed this must be the catfight he had heard other guys talk about when he had overheard some of them on occasion. They talked about a catfight going as far as the girls forgetting their shinobi nature and just brawling. It seemed as if they were brought back to their most primal instincts and just wanted to harm each other. He finally separated them by doing an improved sexy no jutsu that he had made after watching the fight. He could use it to knock out anyone he pleased, but it was kinda embarrassing. He looked exactly like the fourth Hokage, but with whisker marks and a gorgeous build. Haku had blushed as red as a tomato and had then stopped fighting with an unconscious Sakura, whose mind had gone into an unconscious state after seeing an exceptionally handsome man. Naruto had grinned and made himself useful by grabbing her hand and helping her up. Then he grabbed Sakura and they had all walked towards Konoha. Off to the village that was going to be the victim of the demons. A new chapter made especially for those willing to review it after I posted it. I got many reviews. Thanks guys, and I will answer them. Remember that I like reviews. Read by Silverscale. Review section. Pitsuramena Kitsune. Sports a grin. Did you like the scenes between Haku and Pinky? Next chapter is going to be even more exposure to lovely women. Yenim. I'll keep up the great work if you keep on reviewing me. It makes me feel good when I get reviews like yours. Ranma Hibiki. I hope you like this chapter. Foxfire Spirit. A lot of girls are assured. Perdithrin. I hope that this chapter is better. Shakival. Naruto won't be gentle with the people he meets in the Chunin exams. Killing them is a prerequisite, of course. June. Dragon Girl June. Never heard of you but interested nonetheless. You single well. In my opinion the tone of voice is too high in the anime for Haku to have been a boy. Most boys have a slightly heavier voice and even Naruto sounds like some hyper kid. Haku's voice almost sounds like some high school Japanese girl and it's calm. Boy's rather rash and insensitive and it might very well have been a measure to protect herself by claiming that she was a boy. After his one good and nice body that Haku possesses, Andy could imagine a girl posing as a man because she doesn't want to get raped. In some animes you can barely distinguish between male and female. Take for instance Sailor Moon, which features Haruka Tenno, who dresses as a boy and is regularly mistaken to be of the male gender. Almost no chest but still female. I hope that answers that question. KD8 Gun. Beaten Pinky enough? Or should the next chapter feature a parting gift from Haku? Rubberneck. Yeah, Haku looked like a female but could easily have acted like a boy and even stated that she was a boy. Even if you look feminine, didn't notice an Adam's apple on her throat in the anime. I checked the throats of Kakashi and Zabuza and noted that Haku's throat is smoother than them and doesn't have that typical trademark that Asuma, Sandaime, Kakashi, Zabuza and even Itachi possessed. And you must remember that it is my story in which I set the rules. If I want a mass orgy in it, then there will be one in it. Barbatua. Cool indeed. Ice cold if you ask me. Akuma's Ryunite. Sure. Give me some time and I'll get all the girls together with Naruto. Azuresky 123. Glad to hear you think about the previous chapter. DPTHUG 12. I'll work on it as long as I get reviews. Silver Scale. Thanks for reading this. Thick Slayer. He'll do that. Not too soon, but he'll do that. Mad Naruto. Not really. The only effect the heating had was that she'd become naked and knocked out. And of course the orgasm that the chakra evoked did knock Haku-chan out. FSIT-01. This soon enough. SHADOWCELEST 117. More like a relation where are a lot of girls willing to fuck someone. After all, kitsune are the horniest of demons, as I read somewhere, and are in constant need for sex. I don't know if that is true, but in my story it is. Taiya will be included. Arsenal. Sasuke will get his fate handed to him. Sakura will endure. Unless she gets killed by a lesser girl. Lamachi Satsuko. Congrats for what? I don't remember being rewarded with something. If you meant the chapter, then I accepted. Tigra. Then I hope you are pleased with this. Arakan. Competition. What competition? The girls for Naruto or Sakura's attempts to kill Naruto by verbally trying to break his eardrums so that he'd listen to her and help her get her Sasuke-kun. RGFJ. Send me another short review like that and I'll get a twitch in my eyes. A little bit longer the next time and I'll be happy to write a new chapter. Sleepy Kitty. Here it is. The catfight was modeled after witnessing it at a party. It was kinda funny to see those girls go at it. One ended with a split lip and hair getting pulled out while the other was bruised. In the end they were both dumped by the guy. Sekizun Unmei. I like cute and unorthodox pairings. I dislike Naruhina and Narasaku because they have been done too much for my tastes. I hope to see another review from you. Scolds SENTAR04. Sakura got hit pretty much this chapter. I hope you liked it and the prank on Sasuke. I'll give you a sneak preview for the next chapter. The buildings were all made out of bricks or something that looked like mud or sand. Naruto looked at the scenery while grinning. This mission was nice since they got to see Wind Country. He noticed that blonde was a rather common hair color. Red was also a lot in this village. Then his attention was called by Kakashi, who had stopped. Akuma. He looked at the gates and with a grin on his face, he entered the village with a small group behind him following him. The moment he passed through the gates he was subject to the hateful stares of the Chunin who guarded the gates. Naruto looked as if he didn't notice the glares and just walked along happily while his mind was busy with devising new ways to torture someone with only a small plastic knife. His mind began on a downward spiral as he began to think up ways to mutilate someone without even lifting as much as a finger but letting chakra do the mutilation. But then he'd have to be in contact with someone or something like that. It didn't matter to him anymore, but for his continued survival, he had to keep up the facade of a dumb child with mediocre skills. He looked at the streets that were littered with humans. How dare they even glare at him? The Yondaime had said that he was to be a hero and they treated him like he was their worst enemy. Although that was the truth, the villagers didn't know that yet. She looked at the bars of the cage that was the seal and then looked to the side, which had a previously hidden room with a mysterious occupant in it. The mysterious person looked at her and said, "Did you really have to do that to him?" She smirked a foxy smirk and said, "Why not? He likes it and I like it. And it's not as if I don't help him from time to time. Would you care to look at his life for a few hours and see how he has grown?" The mysterious person nodded and Kyuubi let her senses disappear from the boy to let the mysterious person look from Naruto's eyes. Why the person was here she didn't know. The only thing she knew was that he was irritating. He watched through the eyes of the kid that was his container and the container for the Kyuubi and saw the glares thrown at Naruto by the older generation and even the younger. He saw all the disgust in the looks of the people of Konoha and even some ninja glared at Naruto. He looked sideways and saw the lazy Jounin and the girl with the pink hair. Another girl wearing a pink kimono was walking with them and the person could feel the feelings within this body for the girl. Naruto looked at Haku and felt something tighten within his chest. He didn't know what it was, but thinking about Kyuubi evoked the same feelings. He just silently observed them as it served as a great distraction from the glares. He gently studied the curves of her face and the form of the body. He sighed as he looked at Sakura who was glaring at Haku. Wouldn't the girl learn from her mistakes that it wouldn't be very healthy to attack someone who had been ranked as a nukenin? With a small smile on his face he went into the building where they got their missions assigned and looked at the various teams that were assembled there. It didn't look like there were many teams currently receiving or returning missions. Sarutobi looked at the new entrants and mentally he was happy to see a smile on Naruto's face. It was quite rare to see a genuine smile on that kid's face. Sarutobi knew all about masks and the like from his own time of training under the Nai and Shadame. He knew how to distinguish sadness or happiness within every movement of the face. Then he looked at the rest of the people that followed him inside. Kakashi wasn't much of a surprise as he was once again reading his dirty novel. The pink-haired Haruno child was also no surprise. The next person made Sarutobi's breath hitch for a moment. How the hell could he have missed this pretty girl? She looked so good and probably must have a good figure beneath that kimono as well. Naruto looked at the old man and mentally evaluated the old man. He was one of the few that treated him like a human being, and for that Naruto was grateful. Maybe he should put off destroying Konoha until the old man is dead. He didn't know why he was thinking that line, but he knew that it somehow made sense. If only he was sent on a mission without a high-profile jounin with him, then he might be able to make a breakthrough with the seal and release her into the world once again. The slightly pensive look that was on Naruto's face showed that he wasn't paying much attention, and when he bumped into someone he was jerked from his musings. He smiled sheepishly as he looked at the desk where the Hokage sat. "Hokage Jiasen, I made something for you." But that he reached within his clothes and pulled out a small booklet that looked like it was some sort of instructional manual. The Hokage, being intrigued at the contents, opened the booklet and the real cover came into view. It was a magnificent drawing of a girl with green eyes and purplish hair which was standing in a suggestive pose. It took most of his willpower not to let his nose explode in blood as he flipped the next page. Sarutobi chuckled and said, "It looks very nice, Naruto-kun. Have you tried going to a publisher yet? This is magnificent work." Naruto just grinned sheepishly and said, "I just got back, Hokage Jiasen. And I doubt that anyone would publish something I made." The old man chuckled and said, "Well then I think I'll take this to a publisher later today and we'll see about keeping you anonymous. This is almost better than the work of my old student." Kakashi walked over to the Hokage and glanced at the booklet. A small choked gasp came from his mouth and a few seconds later a perverted giggle came from his mouth. "Ma Naruto, you should really publish that one. So that's what you were working on. I wondered about that." Then he turned to Hokage-sama and said, "Hokage-sama, Team 7 is reporting back from our mission to Wave Country. We brought with us one Nukenin who after the death of her master has followed us. It appears like she is willing to join our village." Sarutobi looked her over once and said, "Kakashi, what rank would she get if she joined us now? At least high-level Chunin or even Jounin. She displayed a rather impressive skill that was equal to her teacher Momochi's abuser." "Alright then, it's settled. Miss, would you please state your name?" She looked at the old man who was smiling kindly at her and nodded. She stated her name and looked at the old man who just smiled. "Well then, Miss Yukikage, I think I'll list you as a Jounin with medical capabilities. If you'd like to join the Hunter Nin squad then I suppose that can be arranged." Haku just nodded and said, "I live with the person my master appointed me before his death." Without further ado she walked back behind Naruto and took a pose which looked like a relaxed one, but you could see the muscles being tense so that any attack could be anticipated. Naruto looked at the proceedings and missed the small smile that the Hokage wore. "Kakashi, I want you and your team to accompany Kurenai's team on a mission to Sunagakur. I think there might be some hindering factors on the road to it and I want you to accompany them to make sure there is enough protection for the scroll." "Hi Hokage-sama." Sandaime just smiled and said, "Get a good night of sleep and I'll hand you the scroll tomorrow." Kakashi nodded and Naruto gave a sigh of relief. He looked at the Hokage and said, "Hokage Jiasen, I trust you to bring it to a publisher and keep my name a secret. Although if my name is to be printed on the book then let them write Userum Narutoki." The Hokage just chuckled. "Making a slight word play on your name? Alright, I'll tell them that's the name of the author. I think it'll be published within the week. And thanks for letting me read it." "No problem, Hokage-sama." With that he walked out of the room with Kakashi and Sasuke following. Sakura had stood there just gaping at the casual way he had brushed off the Hokage. Then she too followed behind them. Haku had disappeared the moment Naruto first set one foot outside of the room. Naruto looked at the interior of his apartment and realized that it would take some time to clean this up. He set to work with Haku helping him. She got the empty ramen packages and the rest of the dirt while he was busy setting up a futon and other things. After half an hour they had cleaned it all and Haku looked at the blonde yokai container. She sat at the table and Naruto was about to put down his cloth which he had used to dust off the dust that had collected itself. In the local publisher's office a meeting between the Hokage and the publisher was in progress. The man simply had taken one look at the book and leafed through it before exclaiming that it had to be published and would be in stores the next day. The next day the teams made their way to the gate where they met up with each other and Kakashi got a scolding from Sakura for being late once again without a valid excuse. With a grin on his face Naruto set out from the gates while constantly being talked to by a girl with wide eyes that always seemed to be looking at him. He looked at the Jounin leading the other team and noticed that she had pretty red eyes, but somehow couldn't recall her name. It didn't matter anyway since she had just ordered Kakashi to go and put that damn piece of filth that is called a book away or else I'll make sure that it gets in a very uncomfortable place. Kakashi immediately shut up and ordered the genin to go. Naruto looked at the sky as they walked the road that would lead them to Sunagakure. It didn't matter very much to him that there were other people around him, but he'd rather be free and wild. His instincts told him that if he ran free without clothing that there would be almost no difficulties reaching Sunagakure. Clothing is so restrictive. Kyuubi was once up to her normal mischief as she sent a mental image of a woman undressing towards Naruto through their connection they have. Did you have to do that? Naruto was a little bit peeved at the Kyuubi for sending him that image, so a little part of himself had stiffened and was becoming uncomfortable. Sighing, Naruto got out a pen and some paper and made himself busy by beginning to draw the female curves first and then adding the other features of the woman he was drawing for the cover of his next book. Soon he had a nice girl drawn on the picture and then he began to think about how the plot should be. At least there should be something in it that would truly be nice to his readers, and even if it got eradicated, it would still be a beloved book in the rest of the shinobi world. With the cover drawn, he looked at it and saw the girl he drew standing there in a nurse's outfit with a seductive look on her face. Her black hair was long and hung over her shoulders, while her brown eyes looked at everyone with an intrigued grin as scenes began to pop into his head. The main character would be a demon hunter who was resting at an abandoned castle where he would get attacked by ghouls and other undead creatures. He'd beat most of them and then get injured near his left thigh. That injury would cause him to go to a village which has a hospital in it where a nurse takes pity on him and would start caring for him. Naruto was in the process of drawing a scene where the demon hunter would be getting his injury while keeping an eye on the surroundings. At the moment he wasn't detecting anything suspicious, but he moved his vision from the paper towards the people that were around him and he took note of one thing. That Jounin sensei from the wide-eyed girl had a damn fine ass. He looked at it and studied it for use in other stories. He grabbed his pencil and began sketching the next scene where the creatures would be beaten by a sword slash. He actually drew the lines well and made several dark colorations before he was quite rudely interrupted. "What are you doing?" The dog-using guy had come up to him and had looked at his work. Naruto was actually considering maiming the kid for doing that, but he made some good efforts with keeping his temper. "That is a thing I am working on. It is currently the second book I will be publishing." That got the dog boy's attention. As well as the rest of the teams which crowded around the blonde demon carrier. Naruto was tempted to use some of them all but restrained himself. Instead he looked at teammates Jounin sensei and said. "What's your name, miss?" "I'm sorry but I forgot it." A kind smile was aimed at him and she said. "I'm sorry but I probably forgot to introduce myself to your team or something. I think Sasuke-san knows me since I and Kakashi met up yesterday as well as Sakura-san, but you weren't present. I think it had something to do with your house I think. My name is Yuhi Kurenai. Pleased to meet you." Naruto looked at her and said. "Pleased to meet you too. My name shall not be revealed due to the fact that the mentioning of my name would cause people to go into shock." An amused grin slipped onto her face and she said. "You'll tell me that name, won't you?" Naruto grinned and said. "She's better than you at trying to coerce answers out of someone. Promise me with a blood oath that you'll never tell anyone my name." The mysterious person sighed within the cage. He never knew that the kid knew how to let someone swear a blood oath. "You told him about the oath, didn't you?" "Why, of course. Why not mess with the pretty woman's head? He should have some real action in the real world and not with me through the seal." "Alright, if you know what you are doing then it's fine with me. This is all a test for Konoha. Should they fail then utter annihilation will be dispensed upon them." Then the mysterious person went to go and lie down on the floor of the cage with Kyuubi watching through Naruto's eyes. Why would the kid want her to swear a blood oath on it? Those oaths were usually made by Jounin who swore not to divulge anything of the mission or else they would be exiled from the country they belonged to. Usually they died when they divulged the information because it could only be gotten through torture. Blood oaths were incredibly rare and to the current date there were only a few shinobi who had tried to make blood oaths to their respective leaders. The last person who had made a blood oath had been dead for about 90 years was the original history books. She looked at the kid strangely and continued walking with Kakashi thinking it over in her mind. Why wouldn't the kid tell her his name? From the file she got on the kid like every Jounin got one about the Kyuubi container she knew that the kid was called Uzumaki Naruto and that he was decent at Taijutsu and his ninjutsu was his best area. Almost no talent for Jinjutsu. She looked at the kid and saw a happy smile on his face. She looked at it closely and could see several layers of Jinjutsu on the facial area. She thought back to the report and thought about the Jinjutsu thing. If he knows how to cover his face with several Jinjutsu, then he has something to hide. While she was thinking it over, Naruto knew that it would be hard to hide the fangs he suddenly sported. Why the hell did he even think about telling that woman his name? True, it wasn't Uzumaki Naruto that was his true name. Kyuubi, and he had figured that if he had merged with Kyuubi, slightly elevating him to Yakai status, then he'd no longer be able to bear his human name. And thus she had christened him Naruto Kyuubi no Kitsune. Naruto the Nine-Tailed Demon Fox. His 9 tails had grown overnight while he was sleeping. Naruto had hidden his blood-red eyes and tails with some incredibly advanced Kyuubi had taught him, which should be able to withstand several attempts at dispelling it before the user would even need to think about replacing it. When they walked through the desert that was between them and Sunagaker, Naruto's eyes flashed dangerously as he detected some chakra leaking out of the sand. Immediately he jumped away and a claw made from sand appeared where he had stood only mere moments ago. The boy around his age could be seen rising from the sand with a menacing look on his face. Kakashi and Kurenai got into a fighting position. The boy had only eyes for Naruto. You possess a power that makes mother afraid. Shina. Sabaku Kaiu. Sand began to envelop his legs and he struggled to get free. Hey, it's Shukaku-chan. Why doesn't that old fuck just give up and leave me alone? I told him so many times that I will never give up in my quest to go and kill him. And that Gaki thinks Shukaku is his mother? Naru-kun, you are up for a tough fight. May I please ask that you transform into your Yakai state or perchance even summon me? Naruto mentally grumbled something about not wanting the surprise to be ruined for Konoha. The sand had now enveloped him and the kid was about to perform the killing move, but suddenly a barrier of sand sprung up around him as a kunai was embedded at the barrier. The kid looked at his attacker and said, "It's no use. He will die." Sabaku Sozo. The sand was now crushing his body and he felt the air being slammed out of his lungs. It became hard to breathe all of a sudden and he could do nothing but release the magnificent power of the Kyuubi no Kitsune into the world. The red aura engulfed the sand and it was suddenly blasted apart with force and a figure appeared from the sand. The blonde hair was now longer and the clothing had changed. The clothes were now a long black coat and a uniform beneath it, which was visible to the onlookers because the coat was slightly opened. The face looked mature instead of the boyish one. The blue eyes that had once shone with great vitality into the world were now a blood red, while loaded with anger and hatred for humans in general. So he has used my body to try to get out of the confines of that sand dome. I should have guessed that since we resemble each other so much that he'd be able to draw out my original looks. Maybe he can even awaken his Kekkei Genkai without too much trouble. After all, his mother was one of the strongest of her clan. True. She was a marvelous woman. But thanks to those stuck-up bastards she didn't remember having birthed him in the first place. Now she was married to that stuck-up prick. Married. Makoto-chan would never have left me even if I was locked in here with you. The shithead used some advanced ninjutsu memory wipe on her the moment it was confirmed you were dead. After all, she was his cousin and their precious blood had to be preserved. He cast several genjutsu to make her look like his late wife who died giving birth to her son. And nobody even dared to suspect the great and esteemed police captain to be hiding some secrets. Now you will pay, Shukaku. You fucked up one time too many. Kaisei no Jutsu. A bright red tail made from Kyuubi's chakra lashed out from Naruto and a grin came onto his face. Want to play a little, Shukaku-chan? I know that you don't like me, Shuka-chan, but you'll need to be sealed again or else you might become a hindrance in my plans. With a feral growl he threw the boy away and then the mysterious person took over. The eyes turned a brilliant shade of blue, which made several of the people wonder what the hell happened to the kid. The bright flash was seen and Gaara was slammed into the air by a fast kick to the stomach. Then the mysterious person followed it up with his own version of the Urarenge, opening a few celestial gates, knowing that it wouldn't hurt due to Kyuubi's healing rate. After a few slams with a foot and a fist, the demon-possessed kid fell back onto the sand and the mysterious person smirked. Now came the tricky part. Sealing technique. Gaku Fusion. Chakra became visible on Naruto's fingertips and slammed right into the stomach of the demon-possessed kid. With a grin matching Naruto's, the mysterious person handed back control to Naruto. Oh no. What am I doing? All I remember was sand crushing me and now I'm standing here. Who's the panda guy? Kakashi could only stare. The kid had just executed a sealing method known only to the cages or those who studied sealing methods. This would bear some looking into. And the fact that the eyes had changed was also a thing that should be noted. Without much trouble they got to Sunagaker and Naruto was the one carrying the panda guy as he had dubbed Shukaku's container. When they got to the gates they saw that there were only 2 guards and they looked in astonishment at Naruto who was carrying the boy with a gourd on his shoulders with a gourd visible for all to see. When Naruto entered Sunagaker a silence descended over that part of the village. They saw their resident demon being carried by a strange kid who seemed to be accompanied by jounins from Konoha and a few genin. They parted to allow the strange group entrance towards wherever they were going. Naruto looked at the people assembled there and noticed their looks at the boy he was carrying. He noticed the fear in their eyes. He briefly entertained the notion of letting the Shukaku out just to make them experience true terror, but he decided not to. She wouldn't be so forgiving if he let her enemy out of its mortal shell. Then they'd have to fight against it, and Naruto didn't want to risk it now. It didn't matter very much to him, but at least he would have some fun. He's got some of your humor. I'm not exactly sure if I'd like him to get that from you. Of course he has my humor. He doesn't even know you, but I'm the one who's always been there for him. He trusts me completely. Kyuubi just smiled and said trust is pretty easily gained when a pretty lady would do anything for a guy. Kakashi got into the Kazukige's office and delivered the scroll, and Naruto decided to ask someone why they were so afraid of the boy he was carrying. He decided to ask a Jounin who just stood there idle as if waiting for someone. Mister, can you tell me why everybody is so afraid of this guy I'm carrying? The Jounin looked at Naruto and then gasped as he saw the Kazukige's son lying on the kid's shoulder. He is a bad news kid. If he were conscious now I'm sure he would have killed you without much thought. Like Shukaku could ever hurt me. I'm too fast for that little git to hit sir. The Jounin got unnerved as the name of the beast imprisoned within Gaara was spoken and his eyes narrowed and he said dangerously. How do you know that kid? I'm his arch nemesis from 800 years ago. The damn bastard bit off a good-sized chunk of my tail. It grew back of course, but I'm kinda angry with him. Then Naruto did a few hand seals and whispered. Yaokai secret jutsu. Illusion of forgetfulness. The black aura was momentarily seen around the Jounin's head and then he glared at Naruto and walked away without even having noticed Gaara. Naruto had enough of carrying the weight and threw Gaara off his shoulders, letting the body hit the floor. Then he threw the sand gourd next to the boy and then decided to have some fun with the boy. Even though he'd probably get into some trouble he decided to do some things to the boy. Making a few hand seals he began to manipulate his chakra to make Gaara feel sleepy for weeks since he knew that the container must be awake for the rest of his life lest the Shukaku eat away his soul. That's what that stupid thing always does whenever they deem him worthy of possession. Nobody ever noticed what had happened to the Jounin and to Gaara as they were momentarily distracted by a genin causing some racket about some stupid thing he needed to do. Only Kakashi noted that the Jounin was slightly dazed or something like that but shrugged it off as the heat getting to the Jounin's head and making him dazed. Later they went back to Konoha and Naruto felt slightly better after having seen Shukaku once again and apparently sealed him again. He couldn't exactly remember what had happened, all that he did was a masculine voice telling someone something about taking over or something. Suddenly a disturbing imagery made its way to his mind and without much hesitation he ran to the side of the road behind some bushes and began to puke his guts out. The image he had got from somewhere contained Kurenai-sensei being taken by several guys, including that smoking Jounin that taught Team 10 and Kakashi. When he had emptied most of his stomach contents he came back to the group and received weird looks from the genin and confused looks from the Jounin. He went to Kakashi and motioned for the man to bend down a little since he was still a small guy for his age. As the Jounin bent down and Naruto whispered in his ear. Kakashi-sensei, please tell me something about Kurenai-san. What do you want to know about her? If you think she might be material for a girlfriend then I must prove you wrong. She's shunned most men after her heart and that gave her the reputation of Ice Queen. Naruto just smiled a meek smile and then said, actually it's about her likes and dislikes and what her 3 sizes are. I'm thinking of letting her star in one of the books I'm going to publish. Kakashi's visible eye betrayed some of his perverse intent and he said. She's fairly proportioned and has a nice set of breasts. She looks like an average girl, but once you come close you can see that she has red eyes, which is a very unusual eye color even in Konoha, which is famous for the Byakugan. The other thing is that she never has allowed a man to stay over at her place ever. That also confirms that she is. Wham. The fist slammed into Kakashi's face and made the Jounin fall on his arse as he looked at Kurenai, who had a look on her face that promised a swift death. That is none of your business, Kakashi. Who I like and what I like is my business to know, and you can go and fuck off for all that I care. At the crude language Naruto briefly raised an eyebrow while Hinata blushed and Kiba and Shino just shared the same look of astonishment, although Shino's was almost nullified by the dark glasses that he wore. She sure has some temper with Naru-kun. Maybe you should think about getting into a relationship with her or something. Haku won't be enough to sate your lust. You'll need more women than one to date you. If I may make a suggestion that will stimulate you in the future that would be beneficial for our relationship, then I'd be happy. Sure, tell me what you want to suggest to me. I'd like to suggest that if you see a woman that can fight and looks good to you, that you should just try to get her to trust you and then bond yourself to her. With Haku it would be easily done since she already trusts you a great deal. But this Kurenai woman, then I think you'd need to apply a little bit more tact, and I think that you'd need to transform into a full yaokai if you're willing to try and impress her. Naruto looked as the divine punishment of Kurenai rained down on Kakashi. A ripping sound and an anguished cry from Kakashi was all to seal the man's fate. Paper was falling to the floor and a cover fell with a small amount of dust being pushed away from the cover when it fell. Icha Paradise was on the cover and Kakashi stared blankly at the book which had been ripped apart by the woman. A tear fell from his visible eye and he looked at the rest of the people around and then decided that it should be necessary to keep up a front for them while he contemplated buying a new book to replace the one ripped apart. The rest of the trip was boring and Naruto began to draw several new scenes for the book he was making. Traveling gave him a lot of free time to write or draw scenes for his books. Inspiration was bountiful because they met lots of people in the passing of time and Kakashi seems to take an interest in what he had already drawn. The next chapter of the book would feature something unusual. A girl dressed in very little clothing about to take on a fiend which would manifest as a tentacle demon. The moment Kakashi laid eyes on the work he just let out a chuckle and patted Naruto's head affectionately and Naruto suppressed a shudder. Come on, let's play one more time. I already gave you most of my clothing including my cloak. I quit. Then I will keep your stuff. Damned fox, what did you say? The mysterious person is slammed into a bar of the cage and a small cramp makes its way through Naruto's stomach. He shrugged it off as he might have eaten something bad. The rest of the trip was slightly uneventful, with only one small incident involving Hinata and Kiba occurring with a letter apologizing or something. He must have bumped into her because she had a blush raging on her face. Naruto just smirked and walked with his team with Sasuke being an obnoxious ass and Sakura love-struck fangirl. He felt content with the knowledge that he'd need to get more women and do the same to them like he had done with Kyuubi. In several places women sneezed at the exact same time, one winning a bet because of her sneezing, causing the dice to land in her favor. Her assistant gathered the money and the two women departed with a bag full of money. Entrance into the Chunin exams. He walked through the city looking at the buildings to see if there were any weak points that could be destroyed by a tail and would cripple troop movement a little. So far he had only noted 3 paths that would be able to slow down any defenders if he released the Kyuubi upon the village. With a grin on his face he looked at the villagers who shot him cold looks. He felt the rage beneath their glares and he was glad to say that he too felt rage, but of a different kind. This rage within him was even more powerful since it made him prone to go into a fury which could easily kill off most of the population of the village, with shinobi included. The reason for not killing them at the moment was that there was someone in the back of his mind who kept on telling him that he needed to restrain his anger for some time until Sarutobi was dead. Something about giving the old man some time to live. Still anger coursed through his veins and even though he had Jinjutsu on his face, it twisted into an angry snarl which made the villagers leave a large circle of free space around him. He didn't care as long as they didn't get in his way. He came to his house and opened the door to see Haku lying on the couch asleep. He gently walked up to her and studied her sleeping body. He didn't particularly do very much with it but just studied her delicate features and smiled gently. His ears caught some movement and he turned around to see the Hokage standing there looking at the sleeping woman. The old man calmly walked up to him and spoke in a whisper. I made sure she got home safely. She had a very exhausting day and when I came to pick her up one of the Jounin told me that she had worked to exhaustion to prove that she belonged there. She must have been eager to please you. Naruto-sama. The young woman murmured something softly and Naruto momentarily smiled before he got serious once again. I think I'm going to train tomorrow with Haku-chan, so if you would please inform Kakashi-sensei that I won't be showing up for training, then I'd be grateful for that. The old man smiled knowingly and said. So you might want some free time with your girlfriend, won't you? Well Naruto-kun, I'll pass them the message that the both of you are going to train together and that none of you are available for any missions during that time. I'll take care not to assign any missions to either of you. Naruto kept his face neutral and he reached into his clothing and withdrew a small book from it. Here is the second volume. Did the first volume get good reviews by the readers? I haven't had any time to see if it is well received. The old man chuckled and said, after it was printed the entire first edition was sold out within 3 hours. The second edition is being printed as of now. I'd like to thank you for the cover that says that it's a training manual for learning how to garden. Actually the publisher thought it wise to make 3 covers for it. It's only different from any other training manual because there is some gold lining on the title. The man flipped through some of the pages and giggled perversely when he came to a scene which depicted an action which should have been painful to say the least. It's not every day you see a girl getting raped by 9 tentacles in every orifice they could find. Sandaime looked at the pages and wondered if his student would be publishing one of his novels once again. The doujin that Naruto made were as good as Jiraiya's work and the genius that kid had gotten from his father seemed to be flourishing. The talent the kid had was astounding. The Sandaime walked through the streets thinking about some things. How long had it been when he remembered a bright blue-eyed boy running through the streets following his teacher and coming up with jutsu that were efficient and useful in combat situations. Yondaime, sometimes I wish you were still alive. With that, the old man entered his home and put the doujin in his folder of things that he had to do tomorrow. Naruto meanwhile had just decided that Haku should lie somewhere comfortable. He had picked her up and carried her to his bed and put her into it. He briefly looked at the taller girl and decided that it couldn't do any harm that he was to lie next to her. He slipped out of his jacket and other things and got in the bed. He felt her skin against his and he shuddered slightly when he felt a cold chill roll over his spine. The next day was filled with action for the young boy. He looked at the ceiling when he awoke and heard a startled gasp come from Haku, who had seemingly wrapped herself around him. With a small smile on his face, he gently untangled himself from her and then decided that it would be a good thing to put on some clothes. After he got dressed, he looked at his roommate and said, "Haku-chan, I asked Hokage-san to give you and me a day off so we could train with each other. I have a feeling that we should hone our skills because something that will be catastrophic will happen soon." After having a quick dinner, the two demon carriers went off. Haku had left her hair loose this time and was the subject of many stares from the local men. Naruto just glared at the people who dared even glance at Haku with eerie light blue eyes. He sure knows how to scare people in Kyuubi. It's not often that you see that old guy fall on his arse. I remember him and Saratobi-sama talking about their days as a genin. I can't imagine how that guy got to be on the council. He still hates Naruto-kun for possessing you, don't you think so? Indeed. All you foolish human scum seem to think that he is the one who destroyed your pathetic village, and even as you were their shadow you died and were locked in here with me. I might have died and been put in here with you, but at least I know something that you wouldn't even dare guess. I know, for instance, how to make it so that you can manifest into a true human body with the power being copied to that body while leaving Naruto with your infinite chakra. I won't go into details as of now since it would distract him too much, but it could be done if I manage to figure something out first. The mysterious person stepped into the light and a cape became visible with flames licking the lower part of it in a motif that was cool. A ninja outfit accompanied that, and on the back there was the kanji for the number 4. Blonde hair framed the face and a smile could be seen on that same face while blue eyes looked at the woman looking at him with something of a glare in her eyes. Let's start. With that, the fight was on. Naruto began to tap into the chakra of Kyuubi, which made the air around him begin to waver and act like incredible heat was given off from his body, while Haku's chakra seemed to let the plants around her die with ice forming on the dead leaves. Naruto was the first to act and he jumped at Haku, who dodged a boy and formed one-handed seals, and ice mirrors appeared. Naruto was within the mirrors and he noticed that in every one was an image of Haku wielding something that looked like a sword of sorts. Then in a flash she came out of one of the mirrors and a deep cut came upon Naruto's right shoulder. He watched as it healed immediately. A change came over the boy and his nails changed into claws and his whisker marks became more pronounced. The chakra began to gather around him as he tapped into more of the power that was addicting to use. Red eyes scanned every mirror and a tail ripped out of flesh coming out of the tailbone. It looked like a normal fox's tail, except that it moved like it had its own life. So the little girl wants to play. Kyuubi was watching the battle between her container while Yondaime was watching it from Naruto's eyes instead of just watching from behind the seal like Kyuubi did. He had the rare privilege of being able to access Naruto's eyes to see what was going on without having to peer past the bars of the cage. It didn't give him control over Naruto's body, but it was handy to look at and maybe implant suggestions into the boy's mind. Naruto looked at the girl who he was fighting with and with a grin on his face, he jumped at one of the mirrors and smashed it to bits. Then his tail lashed out and destroyed 3 ice mirrors. A rain followed by swords came from the mirror. Any normal jounin would have been dead long by now, but this battle was different. Demons were fighting this, and if not for their healing powers, both of them would be dead now. The tail destroyed most mirrors except for 3. Naruto looked at the 3 mirrors and said, "Haku-chan, if you wish to beat me, face me head on and we'll see who wins, to jutsu only." But that he was gone from her sight and she grunted as his fist embedded itself deep in her side, making her be propelled backwards away from him. She was launched through several trees by the force of the blow, but just shrugged it off. Her outfit was getting all dirty, but she didn't care at the moment. All that mattered was the fight, and she didn't even seem to notice the stunned looks of the genin team standing there where she had stopped her movement by slamming her sword into the ground. She brought up a sword, and her jounin jacket briefly hindered her movement a little since it had been moved since she had been launched through trees. Naruto came from the trees with the red chakra swirling around him in a chaotic pattern. Within the blink of an eye he was gone and Haku blocked the strike with her sword and then jumped out of the way with Naruto following her. Claws became blurs as they scratched at her face. Blood was dripping from the wounds that Naruto inflicted and suddenly ice mirrors sprang up and Haku appeared holding her sword. You said Taijutsu only and that's what I'm going to do. You never said there was a ban on Kekkei Genkai. But that she flashed at him in a blur of movement that was almost hard for him to follow. He felt his eyes sting because of some pain that was collecting within them and suddenly he closed them and bloody tears came out of his closed eyelids. Haku just attacked him while his body reacted on autopilot and dodged some strikes. Makoto's Kekkei Genkai is awakening. Yuhu, he shall beat his girlfriend with that one. What are you so happy about? He has a Kekkei Genkai, so what? The yondaime smiled and said. Normally it wouldn't be very much to think about, but if you think about it, you should realize what this means, especially with his Kekkei Genkai. Just watch and see what happens. The world slowed down around him as he opened his eyes. There was Haku-chan coming at him with her sword intent on stabbing him. He watched as she came at him in slow motion and then when she was close he grabbed her. Then he swung her around in circles and then let go and the girl crashed with force into the unforgiving earth, knocking her out by the pressure put upon her body as it hit the earth. He looked at her and the stinging in his eyes had gone away. He turned around to look at the genin team and recognized them as the team he was with the previous day. The two boys seemed to be stunned to see him take on a jounin while the girl just looked with those wide eyes. Their sensei seemed to be looking at his eyes so he said. What? She snapped her gaze away from those haunting eyes. They were red with 2 tomatoes in it. The Sharingan had manifested in the eyes of the carrier of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. To her this was a haunting thought because if something weird got out that the carrier of the Kyuubi possessed those eyes, someone might come and gauge them out to use the Sharingan. The only explanation for their appearance must be that the mother must have been one of the Uchiha clan, since no other clan had that eye. Please close off the chakra flow to your eyes, Naruto-kun. She said it in a way that broke no argument and she looked and saw that the eyes had returned to their normal blue color. She sighed and said to her team once Naruto had gone away while carrying Haku. I want none of you to tell a living soul that he has those eyes. If enemies find out about him having those eyes, then the secret of the Sharingan would be lost forever since Naruto isn't as protected as Uchiha Sasuke. Do you promise me that you won't tell? And Kiba-kun, if you tell anyone for some stupid fucking reason, then I will track you down and neuter both you and your dog with a rusty knife and then we'll put one of my worst ninjutsu on you just to make sure that you won't tell anyone again, ever. The boy paled and Kurenai knew that she had gotten the message through. Kiba was the only one who was a loudmouth and could probably tell anyone about them. Shino would be silent about this from the moment she told them to keep silent. Hinata would keep silent just because she was too shy to talk louder than a whisper. The fact that she trusted her teacher was also something that would help with the matter. But she really needed to work on her confidence. While Kurenai mused, Naruto was busy with getting the young woman in his arms back to some semblance of consciousness. He had tried shaking her gently, but she wouldn't awake. Deciding that it would be cruel to just throw some water over her to wake her up, he decided to do it in an alternate way. After all, Kyuubi had said to him that he should have some fun. He gently brushed some hair out of the way and decided that he should sit down for this. If she moved rather suddenly it left the option open for them to crash onto the floor. Come on son. Kiss her. Yondaime's comments rang through the small space that was the cage where he had been locked with the Kyuubi for some time. Said Yaokai was looking at the man while smirking in a vulpine way. Naruto-kun should try to please her. Maybe she'd even allow him to mate with her. That'd be a sight. By the way, now that we are talking about mating, where do you think your mate is buried? Oh great moron. Don't call me a moron. People out there still think of me as the genius who saved them all from you. And I don't know where my wife is buried. You should know since you knew that that prick took my wife and disguised her as his wife who died in your attack. While the unlikely pair continued their argument about the dead wife of the yondaime, Naruto had decided that action needed to be taken and he sat down on a bench close to the Shinobi Academy. He sat Haku on his lap and watched as her head moved like she was some sort of lifeless puppet. He lifted her head gently and kissed her on the lips softly. He was kissing her for about 10 seconds when he suddenly saw her eyes open. He looked into those brown orbs and watched as they looked at him with love. The idea of her loving him, a yaokai, was laughable, but while she did look at him he knew that she had feelings for him. She was the one who took the action after that and she kissed him fiercely. Hearing a sound nearby, Naruto's head snapped in that direction to look at a certain jounin wearing a hit eye over his left eye and his only visible eye without a Sharingan in it, expressing his mirth at having caught the pair in an intimate position. Could you please leave, Kakashi-sensei? I think I was busy here and we could do without your presence for now. With that he glared at the older man who just laughed and said. I just wanted to say that I understand that you wanted a day off. I saw that Haku-sen was also free for the day and I put 2 and 2 together and went to fund you. Naruto gave the man a skeptical look and saw a small cover of a book sticking out of the man's pocket. I take it Pinky will be blown away after she sees what you are reading right now. The manual for using the correct amount of fertilizer on pot plants, eh? I'd like to see Pinky's face when she sees that it is in reality a doujin made by Yuzuru Narutoki. Kakashi just nodded and said. I'd like to thank you for writing it. The artwork is truly sublime. I got it the moment it was published. Okage-sama tipped me off when I went to see him because you had scheduled a break. Naruto nodded and said. Well then I'd like to think that you would be here for just a chat, but we got to talk. Why the hell? Erg. My head. Naruto felt an ungodly amount of pain directly in his head and he blacked out after a few minutes of screaming his head off. He stood behind the familiar bars and there stood a man with blonde hair and the Hokage jacket that Sarutobi had once worn in an old picture of him taken when the man was around 40. The man looked familiar to him and suddenly he realized who exactly he was talking to. The Yondaime Hokage was standing right in front of him and he didn't even bow before the man like any normal Konoha shinobi or citizen would have done. The entire opposite happened. What do you want? Yondaime was taken aback by such behavior of his son. He sighed and said. I'm sorry I had to seal her into you, but I had no other choice. Else we would all have died. I'm sorry. Son. That statement took away all of his mental faculties as the words were processed by his brains and the machine halted as the Yondaime had called him son. So he was the only son of the Yellow Flash of Konoha. Then the bastards could have treated him a lot better than they had done. He felt the rage once again boil through his veins and he looked at the man while he suddenly began to grow fur over his body while tails came from his tailbone and claws grew. Kyuubi sat there on a couch reclining like she had no worries in the world while only wearing a very thin outfit. Alright, what do you want, Atausen? Yondaime looked sadly at his only son and said. I want you to give Konoha their final judgment. If they don't change their ways then I fear that I would be the last Hokage to ever grace this village because destruction of the village would follow if they were judged to be condemned. Then his eyes looked into the red ones of his son and he spoke. I want you to find the grave of your mother. I want you to go there tonight and let Kyuubi take over. I shall make sure that she shall not destroy everything in sight. Your mother's name was Uchiha Mikoto. Although that was the name that she is buried under, her real name was Uchiha Maiko. You possess the Kekkei Genkai of the Uchiha clan. I want you to use it in a time of emergency or when you need to win. Coupled with her power you would be nigh invincible. He waited a few seconds to let all the information sink into his son's skull and then sighed. The time he had to talk to his son was short but at least he could help out a little bit in the Chunin exam. He imagined it wouldn't be very difficult to just help him by teaching Naruto some of his signature moves. That way Naruto wouldn't need to talk with the man he had once called sensei, although it was rather funny to see the man getting launched up in the air by one of Tsunade-sen's punches. I'd like to offer you something that should benefit your training. I want you to use one of my moves in the Chunin exams so that you could show to the world that you are my legacy and not some sort of demon hell-bent on destruction. Naruto just raised an eyebrow and said. But I'm a yokai who's going to destroy much of the village before I'm either stopped by someone sealing into some kid's stomach or I get bored and leave. Yondaime shrugged and said. Doesn't matter, son. Know that I'll always be there for you. By the way I wanted to tell you one more thing before I let you return to consciousness. If you were going to have sex with her then I'd like it if you used protection. Think of it as a worried father to a son who never had to talk but instead managed to get the attention of a kitsune. And if you meet an old guy who calls himself the Holy Sennin of Toads or something, give him a kick right between the legs would you? I still haven't forgiven him for even trying to make me spy upon women bathing as training for my stealth. Although I and your mother met while I was doing that he still deserves to get kicked inside one of those baths. Naruto nodded and the Yondaime smiled kindly upon his only son and said. If you ever meet a woman named Tsunade I want you to tell her that Arashi said that she'd need to know that Jiraiya has peeked on her and her assistant. That should be entertaining to see the fight between the two of them. Naruto just shrugged and said. I take it that your first name is Arashi. Arashi just nodded and said. Tell Kakashi that he's slacking off too much and that he'd need to put Obito to rest. A sigh coming from Kyuubi made both of their heads turn and Arashi took one look at the kitsune before holding his nose with some blood seeping out of it. It seemed that she had wanted to make the old guy faint of blood loss before Naruto left as she was currently stimulating her private parts with a hand. Naruto just chuckled and felt himself awake in the land of the people who lived to annoy him. He opened his eyes to see Kakashi looking at him with a worried look in his only visible eye. Haku stood next to Naruto's bed with a look that spoke volumes. The Hokage stood also next to the bed with a worried frown on his face. A was currently looking at Kakashi and stopped mid-sentence apparently. Naruto looked at Kakashi and said. You shouldn't mourn about Obito too much Kakashi-sensei. It makes you late and Arashi told me that you should be on time. Then he looked at Haku and said, sorry for the scene, but apparently Yondaime had a need for me. I was summoned into the cage where I met him and Kyuubi playing shogi. And Hokage Jiasen before you ask, I'd like to ask you something. Who is Tsunade? The Hokage just smiled and said. One of my students. An excellent medical shinobi and currently traveling. Why did you want to know? Naruto didn't reply immediately and said. I should meet with her one time. I'd need to tell her something about some guy named Jiraiya, and Yondaime-sama told me to give a kick between the legs to one old guy who called himself the Holy Sennin or something. I wonder if Kyuubi has won something. Not much to do there except for some stupid games that apparently appeared there. Sarutobi winced as the boy in the hospital bed spoke about kicking his student right between the legs. If what he thought was true, then a kick in the balls wouldn't be the least of his students' worries if Naruto told his only female student something about Jiraiya, which probably involved peeking on her. Tsunade's fury was well known to the old man. That freakish strength was useful in deterring the pervert. Naruto got up from the bed and looked at Haku, who just stood there. A smile made its way to Naruto's face, making it look like he had just come up with something devious. Within a flash he had pressed his lips to Haku's and he watched as her eyes went wide for a few seconds and then she relaxed and gave in to the kiss. The two older men looked at the kiss without any shame. Actually, Kakashi was blushing a little while Sandaime just looked at the pair. After a few minutes they parted and Naruto said. Now I'm ready to go. Thanks Kakashi-sensei, Hokage Jiasen. With that he scooped Haku in his arms and although it looked odd he carried her over the roofs towards their apartment. When they were about halfway there Naruto noticed that same boy standing there with the sand swirling around him. It appeared like the seal had been broken again because the malicious presence of Shukaku was once again easy to feel. Hey, here is the bastard once again. Let's get him. I second that. Two voices spoke at once in his head and Naruto abruptly halted and looked at the boy with the red hair. He looked at Haku and said, would you please go to our apartment Haku-chan? I think I need to have some words with that boy and it's not going to be pretty. Haku nodded knowing about Kyuubi hating the Shukaku because of an incident in the past. Her demon had told her about it when they had communicated one time during training with her old master. It had told her all about the rivalry between those yokai since the dragon had once been a loyal subject to the Kyuubi and said that her mistress wasn't pleased with the Tanuki demon. In the swirl of fire Naruto appeared right behind the boy and in a voice which was a mix of his own and Kyuubi's he spoke. It sounded evil and ominous. Shukaku. How dare you even show up here? This is my village and I will not allow you to destroy it. The kick rammed straight through the sand armor, letting the young boy crash into the ground from the house he had been standing on. He created quite a dent in the street and he landed next to a blonde girl who was with a guy wearing black and face paint and something wrapped on his back. Currently all were staring at the boy who had been slammed hard into the ground. How dare you? Gaara scowled at Naruto who just glared at him and the blonde Kyuubi carrier said. I'd mind your mouth Shukaku. You aren't even in possession of his body. I on the other hand am. Gaara looked frightened after that sentence, while his companions looked in something that could be described as fear at Naruto. He had the gall to boss around their little brother. Naruto looked at the sand siblings and appeared in a flash next to Temari and took her hand in his. Your beauty is as astounding as a fresh shower of water in a hot desert melody. Then he kissed her hand in a gentlemanly way which had the side effect to make her blush and her brother to growl in anger. Gaara was still pale at the revelation that Shukaku's worst enemy was here and could be unleashed at will. But why did he act that way with his big sister? And why the hell was she so red in the face? He filed that away for later. Temari looked at the cute boy who had kissed her hand and the blush that heated her face increased. They didn't have such boys in Sunagakure. Well, at least none who dared to talk that way to Gaara. Actually, she never had met a single guy who could talk to Gaara and even insult or hurt him in any way and this one had just managed to do that. May I perchance know your name, miss? He asked her and looked her into the eyes. She smiled kindly at him which drew wide eyes from her brother Kankuro, who never had seen her smile at any guy who tried to get her to go out with her because she usually blasted them away with one big gust of wind of that blasted fan of hers. My name is Sabaku no Temari. She said shyly and Kankuro's eyes widened. She had never spoken like that. Naruto took that as a cue and said. Pleased to meet you Temari-san. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. He gave her a dazzling smile which made a nearby Jounin dressed in green spandex rave about the power of youth and the explosion of vitality and youth. His student dressed in the same spandex outfit but just a few sizes smaller wondered if he could be such a great guy too. Naruto just smiled at her and said. Are you here for the Chunin exams? He asked and she answered. Hi Naruto-san. We are here to represent our village of Sunagakure. That moment there was a pink-haired girl coming onto the scene and she pointed a finger at the pair and spoke with that loud and obnoxious voice. There you are. Naruto looked at her and said. What do you want Pinky? Should I tell Haku that you acted all rash once again? I'm sure that she would punish you quite severely, especially after you made it pretty clear that you wanted nothing to do with her being from another village and all. Are you going to do the same to Temari-chan here? Sakura looked at the boy in front of her who had just insulted her. Then inner Sakura came out and screamed inside her head. Punish him for his insolence. Smash his skull. The outward action of Sakura was a physical one. She stomped up on Naruto not unlike some tomboy in another dimension who was doing the same to a pigtailed young man. Then he was thrown backwards by a smack to the face. A look of cold hatred came upon his face and Arashi's eyes widened. He had to step in or else the entire village would be slaughtered by the act of that foolish girl. He knew that his son wasn't the calmest person on the face of the earth. In reality he could ignite in anger at almost anything that irked him enough. A change washed over Naruto's face as Arashi took over and grabbed the girl's wrist and said, "That's enough, young lady. You have no right to hit me. In all my years I have never seen one as rude as you are." The voice was deeper than she knew and she looked at the young man who she was assaulting. He had the same look around him as her teammate, but something was off. This man was obviously older from the manner of speech and of course the fact that his strength was greater than Naruto's. She looked at the face and saw that it resembled Naruto's and deduced that this must be the boy's father. "Gomen nasai, sir. I meant to hit my teammate for being obnoxious." Arashi's eyes narrowed and he took a deep breath and said, "Have your parents never taught you to analyze the situation before storming into something?" Seeing Sakura nod in affirmation, a creepy smile made its way onto the Yondaime Hokage's face and he turned around and looked at his predecessor who had just arrived. "Sarutobi-sama, please allow me to teach this girl some lessons in manners. I'm sorry for leaving the village, but I'll have you know that I fully support my son in his authoring." A perverted grin came on Yondaime's face, but it left soon. The Hokage just looked amused at the Yondaime and was about to say something, but was rudely interrupted by Sakura. "So you are then? So Naruto's father is a dirty and slimy bastard." Sarutobi looked stunned at that and watched as his successor turned a brilliant shade of red in anger at this girl. Ah well, she brought it upon herself. Arashi had enough. So she dared to think that he, the greatest of all Hokage of Konoha, was one filthy A. That would need some retribution. "Little girl, if you were to look at the Hokage monument, tell me which face is next to Sandaime." He spoke in a dangerously low voice. "The Yondaime, of course." Then she turned to look at the face of the Yondaime and then looked at the monument. As realization sunk in, she turned a pasty shade of white until her skin could be seen. She had just insulted the Yondaime Hokage who had seemingly returned from the realm of the dead. But the sigh she keeled over unconscious. Arashi just blinked and said, "Ah well, at least she soiled herself. That's something of a punishment for her. I think I need to go again to Sarutobi-sama. It's been nice scaring the girl and seeing you again." But that his face and stature turned back into Naruto's. Said kid looked around confused and said, "Did something happen?" He looked around confused at the Hokage and the old man just smiled at him and said, "I just had a talk with an old friend of mine, Naruto-kun." Naruto then shrugged and said, "Wasn't Pinky here a few minutes ago?" Then his eyes grew wide as he realized something. "Haku's gonna kill me for being late." He looked at Temari and said, "See you in the Chunin exams, Temari-san." Blowing her a kiss, he disappeared, leaving behind an amused Hokage and two confused teens and one blushing girl who would later let her brother experience flight by a gust of wind from her fan as he teased her about it. Ara would just glare at the two of them and tell them to never mention anything of what just happened to anyone or else the sand would crush them. The fear that the Kyuubi had instilled in him made him uneasy. And thus he acted odd the entire time they were at their hotel. Even Baki, their Jounin sensei, noticed it and was afraid to awake Gaara's ire. When he got home, he looked at the door and slowly pushed it open. To his great relief, he watched Haku standing there, apparently busy cooking something. She seemed absorbed in her work and Naruto snuck up on her and let his arms encircle her waist while he said, "Hello, Haku-chan." Her reaction was one a girl would make when amused and Naruto was greatly relieved when she giggled. "Phew, Naruto-kun, did you teach that guy not to mess with you? I'm now busy with making dinner for the two of us and when I'm finished with it, I'll tell you that dinner is ready." Naruto knew that no disaster would occur and he went and sat down on his couch and began to meditate about all the things he had seen today. The message from Kyuubi was the main topic he meditated about and the only thing that would be a bother is the agreement of the girls. If they started to fight about him, then it would lead to mass destruction. Kyuubi basically had given him the green light to get as many women as he wanted and to create offspring with them. That meant some physical labor for him, but at least it was nice to do. A little bit of drool dripped out of his mouth as he began to fantasize about Haku's well-toned body. Behind the seal, Arashi was losing to Kyuubi, who was cheering as he lost some clothing. They were playing strip poker and the kitsune had won almost every time. Well, she never lost more than one piece of clothing and was smirking as Yondaime removed his pants. "I quit." With that he clothed himself. He always played until he was in his underwear because he didn't want to make his son angry with him for letting his girlfriend aka Kyuubi see his father naked. And also because he hated being in the nude. He didn't look at the pair whenever Kyuubi and Naruto would go at it. It didn't interest him in the least to see a Yaokai queen and his son fuck each other senseless. If only he got some action in the real world, then it could all be easier. If only his wife were alive. Remembering that he had asked his son to go to the graveyard that evening, he knew that Kyuubi was up to something, and it probably wouldn't be good for someone. He knew that she would often get angry just because she had watched through Naruto's eyes without the boy knowing it and saw the glares. Somehow he believed that the Kyuubi really cared for his son, and not just as some sort of sex toy to play with and then kill once she had got enough out of it. Naruto awoke from his meditations as the door opened and the girl who lived with him appeared from the doorway holding some bowls of rice and hot sauce in her hands. Naruto got up and got the rest of dinner, and so he sat on one end of the table. He looked at her and said to her, "Itadakimasu." Then dinner began. Naruto ate slowly while thinking about the positions he and Haku probably could do if they decided they would feel the need to go and have some hot steamy sex. He was probably looking distracted or something because he faintly heard Haku remark something and he snapped back to attention. "What did you say?" "I asked if you would like some more rice." She answered and he nodded and his bowl was refilled. When the dinner had ended, Naruto gave her a smile and said, "I have some things to do, Haku-chan, and probably will be away for some time. Kyuubi asked me to go to the cemetery to do something, but she hasn't told me exactly what that was. Maybe she just wanted to train there or something." Haku nodded and said, "Be back soon. I don't want to be alone for a long time. I don't want to be alone without you." Smiling confidently, Naruto answered, "Sure, I'll do whatever she asks me to and I'll be back after that. Don't worry, it's not as if she's gonna let me awaken the fury of the dead there or something." With that he got out of the house and closed the door behind him. Within 10 minutes he was in Konoha's cemetery and it looked kinda spooky with all those graves. A thought came to his mind that there would be a lot more graves filled when he attacked the village. "Go to the grave of Uchiha Mikoto and wait there for my instruction." Without questioning her orders, Naruto searched the graves of the Uchiha family, a family to which he should belong to as he had manifested the Sharingan. He stopped before the grave of Uchiha Mikoto and waited for Kyuubi to tell him what to do. "I'll take over for now." With that he felt detached from his body as his eyes turned red and a menacing reddish aura enveloped him. His hands began making demonic seals and a long sequence of seals was made before he spoke out with his voice all Kyuubi-like. "Genjutsu. Rebirth of the corpses." Then he watched as his chakra seeped into the grave and a body was pulled from the ground without any meat on it. Then there was chakra enveloping it and flesh began to grow until there was a nude female body floating in the air held there by chakra. Then the chakra disappeared and Naruto felt slightly faint. He began to sway in the wind like some leaf and he suddenly lost his balance and fell on his ass because the chakra had literally burned through his chakra coils at a pace which was enough to kill someone lest they had some regenerative properties like he had. "You brought back my wife." Arashi was ecstatic to see his wife back alive. Naruto just looked at her and sighed as he almost fainted due to exhaustion. His mother stirred and opened her red Sharingan eyes with only 2 dots in it. "Where am I? The last thing I know is that Arashi-kun visited me while I was birthing my son. Then all I remember was my brother visiting me and then darkness." "Mother." She noticed a blonde boy lying there and walked towards him. He looked so much like her little baby boy that she had gazed upon only a few moments that it was almost as if she were approaching her own son. "Mother, I have revived you. Father has been itching to see you again, but he's still locked within me. Take the cloak lying in my bag. Put it on as you are naked. After all, no son would like the world to see his mother naked. I don't think I have the strength to be awake for anything but a few moments, and I'd like you to take me to my apartment." Then he told her the address and pointed towards his bag before fainting. His energy had run out and his coils were slowly repairing themselves from the damage caused to them. She grabbed the cloak and saw that it looked suspiciously like her old Anbu cloak. She put it on and found that it covered her nicely. She sighed and went to pick up the boy who had apparently resurrected her. She didn't know what had happened, but it seemed like she died and her son on orders of his father had resurrected her. The locked up part she didn't understand, but it must have something to do with that seal he was working on last time. She asked what he was doing. She slung the boy over her shoulder and went to the given address and knocked on the door once and saw that it was opened by a pretty girl with long black hair. She saw the boy and mumbled something about Naruto-kun and something else. Deciding that the name of her son confirmed his identity, she stepped inside and after that girl asked who she was, she just answered, "My name is Uchiha Miko and I'm Naruto's mother. He resurrected me from the realm of the dead and here I am." Haku was stunned by the revelation that Naruto had managed to resurrect his mother, but when she thought about it, he easily could have done so because of the Kyuubi. She shrugged and said, "Shall I prepare a bed for you?" Miko looked at the polite girl and said, "Sure." I think I'm going to have a talk with an old man about something if what I think has happened, and then I'm going to make sure that you, me and Naruto go to live in my original house." They chatted for a few minutes before deciding that Haku would sleep with Naruto on his futon while Maiko got Haku's bed. Haku actually offered that suggestion to be close to Naruto for some reason which she herself didn't know. Maiko just smiled and mumbled something about young love. Then she went to bed too. None would know about the man hidden in the shadows a few kilometers from Konoha who chuckled and said, "Soon Sasuke-kun, you'll be all mine. Kuku. First test." He looked at his ceiling. It had been too long for him to remember having cuddled up to an attractive female who lay in his bed. He looked at Haku's sleeping face and suddenly realized that he was in his bed and with Haku in the same bed as he was. Somehow he had gotten in bed and Haku had also gotten into his bed. Hearing a soft humming coming out of the kitchen, he began to get up out of bed and softly slipped from between the sheets, letting Haku sleep. When he got to the kitchen, he noticed a black-haired woman making some rice on the stove. He just gaped at the woman as she turned around and said, "Have you slept well, Naruto-kun?" He remembered everything that had happened, but still it hadn't fully penetrated his mind. How the hell could a human show such kindness towards one such as him? But he remembered her being his mother, and mothers often have a soft spot for their children. After he had looked at her, he said, "I'll go wake Haku-chan." With that, he turned around and suddenly got an evil idea in his mind. Why not amuse himself a little and actually remove some clothing from Haku? After all, he was still a hot-blooded young male, so while his mother would be able to bear a half-naked woman roaming through the house, he would enjoy it because he would have a good view of Haku's breasts. "You better keep away from that train of thought, Naruto-kun. You'll take her whenever I want you to take her and fuck her into submission." Naruto's face fell a little, and when he was about to open his door, the door opened and Haku came out and looked sleepily at him. Clearly she was sleepy or something, but he didn't mind. He sighed out loud and looked at her and said, "Mom wants you at the table in 10 minutes, Haku-chan. Since you are my girlfriend, I think it is best you hurry. After all, it wouldn't do well to disappoint the mother of your boyfriend." With a smile in place, he walked back to find his mother setting the table. Instinctively he began to help her out, and as they had finished setting the table, Haku appeared with her long black hair unbound, making her look like a typical beauty with her long hair and great assets. After breakfast was finished, a few knocks were heard on the door and Maiko went to see who was there. When she opened the door and peered outside, she saw a young man in a Chunin vest standing there. "Hello. Why are you here?" she said, and the man stiffened a little at hearing her voice. "Might I ask who you are and what you are doing in my student's house?" Iruka was looking at the woman who was still looking at him with irritation in his gaze. He wanted to talk to Naruto about the Chunin exams that would be held within a few days. The strange woman looked strangely familiar to him, as if he had seen her before. "Well, I'm Naruto's mother, freshly from the realm of the dead." She actually giggled as he looked at her with wide eyes. "Yes, and I think I'd like to have a little talk with the Hokage. After all, since my son apparently manifested the Kekkei Genkai of our clan, I want to make sure that he is once again able to live in his ancestral home and not in this crappy apartment." She looked at him with a look that bordered on insanity, and the man actually recoiled as somehow he got the image of a fully grown Sharingan staring at him. He had in his life met 3 people who had their Sharingan activated, and that still made for a scary sight. She bade him inside, and when the man was inside, he looked at her. She seemed to be around her mid-20s. Something about the statement about her being revived from the dead irked him. How the hell had Naruto known who the hell his mother was? But then the answer came to him. The Kyuubi must have told the boy in some attempt to get out or something. But here stood a woman radiating something that was odd. She was radiating something that rubbed him the wrong way and made him want to attack her. It puzzled him for a few moments, but then he figured what it was. The Kyuubi's chakra must still be within the body and thus making him hostile to the woman due to the fact that she possessed some of that aura of dread that surrounded the Kyuubi. Then he noticed the pair sitting there talking to each other and a smile came to Iruka's face. To see Naruto talking with that girl so carefree made him happy, seeing that face all happy. Normally Naruto looked like he was angry at someone or just a hyper blonde who wouldn't shut up. Suddenly he noticed the woman who introduced herself as Naruto's mom said something. "Naruto-kun, I'm going to talk to the Hokage for a bit. I'll be back around noon." Naruto looked at his mother and said back in a casual tone, "Sure, mom. I'll help Haku-chan cook some dinner." The woman looked at the pair and said, "And if you decide to have sex on the counter, then please don't make too much of a mess. I remember that your father and I did it once and it was very difficult to explain the stains on his coat." She added with a grin on her face that was eerily reminiscent of her son. "Moom." She laughed and then was gone from sight. Naruto just sighed and continued his sentence. "I'd just take her against the wall." That had the rather comical effect of both in Haku blushing beet red. Naruto just grinned and said, I can't help it that I got a perverted kitsune living in my stomach, occasionally playing strip poker with me. She's urging me to get some action or I'll suffer stomach cramps for the rest of my life. Then he took a look at the clock and his eyes went wide. I'm late. Within 10 seconds he was gone dressed in full combat gear off towards the building where the Chunin exams would be taking place. He got there just in time. He slammed open the door just to see Kakashi talking to Sasuke and Sakura about them not being able to join the exams without Naruto. Immediately a jutsu was sent at him and Kakashi avoided it. The man grinned and said, "You're ready to enter then. Good luck." Naruto grinned and stepped inside. He looked around for anyone who stood out a little and noticed a grass nin who seemed to have an unusually high concentration of chakra around him. Something familiar was there about that guy and Naruto vowed to keep an eye on that guy during the exam. Then there was a team that consisted of a guy wrapped in bandages and one guy that looked like some girl with those clothes that screamed that they were gay. The spiky hair only identified the kid as a male. Then there was a girl with long black hair. She seemed odd, like she didn't really want to be here. Take her as a pet. She could be of some use if the Kekkei Genkai she has is what I think it is. With that the Kyuubi went back to looking at the other people in the room. Naruto sat down and then a large poof of smoke was seen and the examiners appeared standing there. Naruto noted a familiar face between them and sighed. How the hell was she here at this time? He just accepted it for the moment but still Haku stood there smiling at him in particular. He quickly made a few signals in Anbu code. How the hell did you get here? She lifted an eyebrow and signaled back. I got selected as an examiner. Naruto's eye twitched and he signaled to her. Never mind then. But I'm still going to do what I said when we were at home. Maybe not up against a wall, but somewhere comfortable at least. Having sex against a wall should be somewhat uncomfortable to you. Aku was keeping a straight face through all of that while Ibiki just stood there looking at the people assembled there and noted the communication between the two. He sighed momentarily before speaking up and breaking up a small fight between some sound guys and a genin from Konoha. Listen up you bastards. This is the first exam. I'm your head examiner Marino Ibiki. This is a test of your knowledge so listen up. You start with 10 points for 10 questions. Every time you answer a question wrongly then you get 1 point deducted from your score. Every time a teammate answers wrongly on a question all of you lose a point. Any questions? Nobody had a question and sheets of paper were given out to the genin who set to work. Naruto looked at the sheet and sighed. These questions would be too difficult for normal genin so he would have to cheat. There is that girl sitting next to him who is using those weird bleak eyes. Don't worry, all will be fine Naruto-chan. I'll take extra good care of you. Let's show all of those worthless humans what a real yokai is capable of shall we? With that a dreadful chakra appeared around Naruto. It was invisible, but it could still be felt. Dread was seeping through everyone in the room except for Naruto. He felt totally at ease as if he were in some sort of trance. He looked at the sheet and began writing the answers down and added a small note to the bottom of it. Ibiki-san the next time you try to intimidate us or something try to at least use some of your killing intent. It makes it a lot more believable. And if you did use some I didn't feel it. Yours sincerely. Uzumaki Naruto. But that done he stopped emanating the aura and he watched as several teams quit immediately. He grinned with his eyes briefly turning red for a second which went unnoticed by everyone. Then the last question was announced and Ibiki said that everyone passed. Then the glass of a nearby window shattered and a woman named Mitarashi Anko jumped through the window wearing a cheerful smile with most of her clothing covered in blood and other gory bits. Hi people. It's me, the incredibly sexy and still single Mitarashi Anko and the examiner for the second part of the exam. Naruto looked at her for a moment and stated quite loudly. No wonder you're still single. You're so insane that nobody wants to be around you. That reserved a glare for him and she said. Who the hell do you think you are? Naruto looked at her and said. Uzumaki Naruto and probably the only one who would ever classify you as a damn hot woman. What I just said was just the general opinion about you. She raised an eyebrow and said. Ah well at least if there's one person who thinks I'm hot and sexy, then I can't complain. And are you offering to become my boyfriend or something? Naruto just looked at her and said. Except that my mother would say something about me associating with the likes of you yeah. I'd love to hear you scream my name as loudly as possible. But that he flashed her a grin which held razor-sharp teeth which blinked in the light and obviously scared the hell out of every genin in the room except for the one with the silver hair and the glasses and the grass nin and Gaara. Please stop with the foreplay Anko and get to work. I'm sick of you dilly-dallying with some guy who is younger than you. That earned Ibiki the glare of the Takebetsu Jounin and of the container of the Kyuubi no Kitsune whose eyes became two red pits of hell itself. You dare say something like that to me, you lowly mortal. Ibiki looked at the glares from both the Kyuubi as well as Anko and sighed. Just get on with it. I want to go back home to my nice torture rooms. It's so much fun torturing the hell out of Nukanen that I hate giving exams. With that the man disappeared in a poof of smoke. Anko turned to Jenin and said. Alright guys, let me tell you something about the next exam. This time it will be taking place in a few days, so you'll have some time to rest up a little and prepare yourself for what's to come. I'll cut you in half at least. It's so exciting seeing young kids like you get butchered. Cuckoo cuckoo. The creepy laughter that came from Anko's mouth was a clear indication that this woman wasn't sane anymore, and most genin except a few who didn't feel fear pushed themselves as far away as possible. I want all of you to report to Area 44 in 3 days. See you then. With that she was gone as well as Naruto. Haku disappeared only moments later in hot pursuit of the maniacal woman who had grabbed her Naruto-kun. While not being a pervert, she really did want to do it sometime just to feel what it was like. She wasn't about to let some woman take her Naruto-kun. Battle of the Broads. He looked as the roofs of Konoha flashed under him. He didn't know why the Takubetsu Jounin had decided to grab him and he didn't want to find out, but the hail of ice was a good indication that Haku was in hot pursuit. He sighed briefly and then decided that he didn't want to do very much except to enjoy the show. Give him back. Haku screamed at the Takubetsu Jounin who just grinned and screamed back. I saw him first, he's mine. A hailstorm of ice was the only answer to that and Anko had to duck under them very fast or she'd be hit by them. In another part of the village another scene was taking place. Get here you old geezer. With a Sharingan in her eyes spinning madly, she threw an unfortunate Anbu right at his companion and sent the two of them to the floor. The woman was a force to be reckoned with because she was now single-handedly bringing down 3 Anbu. Being a former Jounin before dying she possessed the skills to take on up to 4 Anbu. The Hokage appeared on the scene only to duck as an Anbu went sailing over his head. Please calm down miss. He saw her turn towards him and his eyes widened marginally as he saw the spinning Sharingan. Suddenly his eyes went even wider as she appeared in front of him and shouted right in his face. How could you let my precious little angel live in that dump that he called home? The killing intent of an enraged mother was washing off the Hokage and he briefly considered his options at the time. This woman was distraught about something and the only way that this could be solved was to ask what the hell was wrong. What do you mean miss? My son Kazama Naruto, carrier of the greater Yokai Kyuubi, was living in a goddamn dump Sarutobi. I want him in his ancestral mansion by tonight or else I'm going to take this to the council. I, Kazama Maiko, wife of the deceased Yondaime Hokage, wish that my son aka Naruto will live in the home of my family, aka the Uchihas. Sandaime's eyes looked at the woman and said. That's impossible, Kazama Maiko died in childbirth. Her eyes flickered briefly and she said. Well my little angel resurrected me by some miracle or something, but I don't care. All I want is that the 3 of us get to live in the Uchiha mansion with any of my remaining family if they are still alive. The Hokage scratched himself behind his left ear and said. Well the only Uchiha that still lives there is Uchiha Sasuke. Technically Naruto and he should be cousins due to the fact that you are Makoto's sister. I think that Sasuke would like some company since his brother killed off most of the Uchiha when he was 13. The poor boy has since then been obsessing about killing his brother. Maiko shook her head sadly. My prick of a brother would have done anything to keep that from happening. Itachi was a good kid, he wouldn't do such a thing unless it was necessary for the clan. What I remember is that he used to be such a happy kid. Let me go. A screaming Naruto was dragged past the window by Anko and Haku was in pursuit with several ice flying past the window at Anko who was now sporting a few scratches. The Hokage and Maiko just looked at the threesome sped past and Maiko could not help but make a remark about it. He's so much like his father. Always getting the attention of multiple ladies at the same time. I wonder if he's going to do the same like we used to do, letting another woman in our bed from time to time. That moment was the time that the Hokage's nose exploded in a shower of blood. Maiko just grinned and said. Still a hentai nah? With that, she made sure to leave a note that they were going to live in the Uchiha mansion and that there was nothing he could do about it. Naruto just looked in amazement as he felt snakes fly past him as Anko initiated her counterattack and he watched as they missed their target as Haku summoned up an ice mirror. He sighed and just wanted to get away. For the first 10 minutes it was actually nice to see the fight between the women, but now it was getting rather annoying. You should feel honored that you've got 3 women fighting over you. The voice of Kyuubi drew him out of his daze and he mumbled something that sounded something like, what the fuck? He looked at Anko who just wore a maniacal grin so much like his old sensei who had taught him that in a few ninjutsu. It really was a shame that he had gone away suddenly since the man hadn't stared at him with the usual hatred of the villagers and shinobi but rather regarded him as some sort of study object. The man had been so kind as to invite him to his home a few times where he met a girl who was older than him. He guessed that her age would be around 17 or something. The man had often called him one of his prize students as he completed a jutsu he was taught by the man. They mostly had a relation to snakes or were emulating poison or other things like that. The man's long black hair had often been arranged in a mess as the man had practiced with a young girl and began to praise her on her progress. Then suddenly the man had left and the girl had seemingly disappeared too. She smelled kinda like Anko. If only he could remember that girl's name, then he might be able to track her down. He sighed as he was once again busy evading some of the senbon needles that Haku had thrown at Anko. He released a small amount of the Kyuubi's chakra and wriggled free of Anko's grip and then ran over the roofs until he couldn't run anymore and figured that he was far away from the two women. He noticed a man standing there talking to a Konoha genin with whitish silverish hair. The long black hair and the yellow snake-like eyes were a clear indication that this man was either related to the sensei, that a taut manner of speaking was also reminiscent of the man, and Naruto's eyes went wide as he recalled the name of his sensei and shouted Irachi sensei. The first clue that a person was present there when he was just instructing Kabuto on what to do was the small thump of shoes hitting the tile. Nonetheless, he continued giving his instructions knowing that he could get away easily enough. Kabuto was skilled enough to beat a jounin easily, so that wasn't a thing that he needed to worry about. He turned around when a cry of Irachi sensei was heard and let a small smile slip onto his face. So the boy had come back to him after he had needed to leave the village and had detected the presence of his sensei once again. While he didn't hate the boy for what he carried, he had always taken into account the fact that the kid might be dangerous, but when he had seen the treatment of Naruto by the village, he had decided to do something about it. He was a jounin at the time, and he might be a little bit too anxious to learn the immortality jutsu, but it still tugged at his heartstrings to see a kid getting abused by the villagers. The memory had come back to him once he had seen Naruto trudge home with bruises forming on his skin, and he remembered a pale young boy who had suffered at the hands of his father for looking too much like his mother. He had gotten her pale features and her looks and long black hair, and he saw the disgust in his father's eyes. Focusing on the boy, he saw the muscles beneath the clothes and smiled at the boy. Truly, he had grown. Now should be the time to teach him a few techniques that would require a good deal of chakra manipulation. The boy would be learning how to become as fast as a striking cobra and to be as deadly as the snakes. Uzumaki Naruto would be a great student, which would change the fate of Konoha. Orochimaru didn't know how right he was as his student came to him with a cheerful smile on his face. The first question that came from his mouth was, "When are you going to destroy Konoha?" Orochimaru looked at his young student and then closed his eyes. Had the boy somehow read his mind? He dismissed Kabuto with a hand gesture and then turned to Naruto. "I'll train you if you tell me why you want to know when I'll destroy Konoha." Naruto just smiled and said, "Deal." Then he went into a small explanation of how fed up he was with Konoha and about the reason he joined as a shinobi, just to learn how to kill people in the most gruesome ways. Orochimaru was pleased with his student. Seeing as there were only 2 days left, he spoke. "I'll train you tomorrow, and then you'll learn a taijutsu style known only to me and my daughter. I'll meet you in this spot at exactly 6 a.m. But that he was gone in a whirl of leaves, and Naruto was smiling at the spot where the man had stood for only a few seconds ago. He sighed and said, "Konoha, you'll feel the power of me and the Kyuubi no Kitsune once again. I have judged you and you have been found guilty. Let the red blood spill forth from your inhabitants and taint the streets." But that he went off to find his mother. She would need to be informed that he was going to train with someone that he trusted. Training with Snakey-san. The next morning he appeared in the same spot waiting for his apprentice. He would need to put out all the stops and teach the kid something useful. Pity was something that was almost foreign to him, but in reality he was just a man with a wish for immortality and a drive to learn any jutsu in existence. The snakes were his to command, and that was a good thing because most of his jutsus relied upon snakes or emulating snakes. The taijutsu style he was going to teach Naruto would make sure that there was a distinct speed advantage and that the enemy was disabled quickly. Orochimaru briefly considered just teaching the kid the standard style, but what the kid had said about destroying Konoha had prompted him to think it over a little bit and thus decide to teach him the advanced style. The style that could even defeat a Hyuga of the main branches. Orochimaru had won a battle with Hyuga Hiashi just after he had defected from Konoha. His apprentice appeared right on time and not even exhausted. He studied his apprentice carefully and noticed a mark on his neck which seemed to be a hickey or something. Raising an eyebrow but not commenting on it, he just said, "Let's go, we're training at the ground I trained at. I'll instruct you in the style there." Naruto wondered what his sensei was up to. The man seemed to be distracted or something and was not at all focused on him. Perhaps something had happened to throw his plans into disorder. He always seemed to be mulling over things whenever Naruto saw the older man, and Naruto just heard the man speak about a training and briefly thought about how he would learn under the sensei. He had briefly caught a glimpse of him and his daughter training, and what he'd seen made his heart swell with excitement. "You haven't been very excited in the last few days. You haven't even come to visit me and I'm getting bored with beating your dad in poker. Come on, I want to fuck. I don't even care if you summon me into the real world to do so. I just want to feel you in me and feel your sweaty body on mine as we both are feeling the ecstasy at its highest peak. Kyuubi let out a perverted giggle as she thought about it. Naruto just mumbled something under his breath about horny kitsunes and that they never have had enough but continued following his teacher. Orochimaru stopped at the training grounds and then stood there and a Konoha hit I-8 was tied around his head. He looked at his student and said, "You're going to learn a style of taijutsu that relies on speed and pure fear. It allows you to kill someone from a distance by either paralyzing his body and then using a kunai or something that can kill as a weapon and either cut the throat or impale the forehead. The only requirements to learning this are that you will need to use this style at least once on an opponent to make sure you know it. It won't be easy as this style isn't learned within a day or in a week, but since we only have 2 days I'll make sure to at least teach you as much as possible." Naruto just looked at the man and then said, "Sure. Teach it to me and I'll have it down within the day. I learned Kage Bunshin within 4 hours, so this style is no different." Orochimaru just nodded and began to slip into a battle stance. Then he attacked a training dummy with speed that was barely visible to the naked eye. The training dummy turned into dust as Orochimaru stopped and Naruto could see that the man wasn't even exhausted. That was a small sample of what the style can do. Now you try it. Naruto got into the stance that Orochimaru had used and the man looked at him with an eye that scanned for any flaws. No, you are doing it all wrong. You need to bend your leg a little bit more to gain more speed. And your hands are in the wrong place. Try it like this." Orochimaru got into a stance which Naruto copied almost exactly. He watched how the man's legs were bent and took notes on how he held his hands. He looked at the dummy in front of him and watched how his sensei slowly went through the attacks and not utilized all his normal speed but just went extremely slow for him. Naruto just watched as Orochimaru's hands shot out and rammed through the dummy's shoulders. Obviously what was slow for Orochimaru was fast for a normal genin, even with a Kyuubi sealed within his stomach. Naruto sighed and tried moving like his sensei. He rammed his hands within the dummy but slightly missed some points where his arms were to hit. Orochimaru just gave him a disappointed glare and then promptly instructed him on how he could make sure that everything would work. By the time that noon had come around, Naruto could execute an attack so that it hit 60% of the time. To Orochimaru he was just a tool or something like that, but if he played his cards right he could reap the benefits. Orochimaru was a cold-hearted bastard just like himself but seemed to possess some traits like kindness, but it was locked away very deep within the recesses of his soul. He never seemed to get used to his sensei's creepiness as it just clung to the man like a cloud of flies to a dead body which is bloated from all the gases that heap up inside of it. He looked at the training dummy once again and summoned up all of his willower and then rammed his hand straight through it and did the combo move and even began to improve on it so it could be used better without losing speed. Instead of the shoulders he aimed for the arm muscles in case the opponent decided to block. In real life it wouldn't have mattered very much, but this time the dummy's arms were blown off by the impact and Orochimaru found it fit to comments. "A rather nice variation on it, although I'd like to tell you that that was the follow-up combo that I was intending to teach you. I see that you've successfully utilized the brains you seem to possess and have found the follow-up within a mere training session. Now I'll go through the forms that you'll need to master by the end of the day if you want to learn the style before the time limit is up." But that Orochimaru looked at another dummy and Naruto could feel the killing intent stream out of the man and at the dummy which had no effect. Then Orochimaru drew a kunai and it lodged within the dummy's forehead exactly. Naruto just looked at it and scoffed. "Is that everything?" Then he looked at the dummy and focused all of his hatred and killing intent for Konoha on the dummy and an even stronger killing intent was generated. Naruto grabbed a kunai with a white knuckle grip and threw it at the dummy's forehead, which literally exploded as the kunai was covered by a small amount of chakra when Naruto had thrown it. A few claps came from the side as Orochimaru looked at his student's work. "Wonderful, Naruto-kun. I'm glad that you have gotten it so quickly. But now I must depart or else they might even try to arrest me for trespassing on Konoha property. If they see you training then they'll just assume that it was your aura or something that can be explained by the Kyuubi. I'll see you tomorrow around the same time as today on this training field. Tomorrow we will train until dusk. Is that understood?" Naruto just nodded and the man teleported away in a swirl of leaves. Naruto just picked up all the kunai that had been left on the field and then went home. He looked at his mother who stood there waiting for him and she said, "We're moving out. Come on." He gave her a look and just followed. They walked through the streets with Maiko dressed in a typical jounin outfit and not receiving any glares while he was dressed in black slacks and was being glared at. He sighed briefly as they passed another crowd of hatred-filled villagers and when his mother led him to a large mansion with a fan embroidered upon its wall she said, "I lived here a long time ago. I wonder how my little nephew is doing. At that same moment Sasuke rounded the corner and looked at them and said. Dope, what are you doing here? This is private property. Maiko turned around and said, you must be little Sasuke-kun. I have heard so much about your pregnancy from my sister. You must have been adorable when you were born. Sasuke just stared at the strange woman dressed in a uniform and said, excuse me. I don't think I ever met this sister of yours, so I would like it if you disappeared from my house. Maiko got a twitching and bulging vein on her forehead and said while activating her Sharingan. Listen well, young man, I will not be talked to in that way. I may not be your mother, but I am at least your aunt, and that means that Naruto is your cousin. So be polite to him and me and we'll get along fine. Got it? Sasuke just gave a small nod of acknowledgement and then went back inside, muttering something about how vengeance would not be delayed. I liked Itachi better. At least he knew when to talk to his aunt with his shoulders straight and looking me in the eye. This little brat only makes me feel uncomfortable. I'll get some manners into the kid even if I got to beat them into him. But that the two Sharingan users, mother and son, went inside the large mansion to get settled in. Haku would come later to get her own room, and Naruto went to bed immediately to get well rested and be in top shape for the training that would occur the next morning till evening. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others videos I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video.